Hunter or Huntress, Chapter 1. The Offer OCs. Chapter 1. The Offer. Tom sat glaring at the screen, face to face with yet another stupid task to slave away the hours. He thought to himself, why do they need an engineer to resize a fucking water pump mount from imperial to metric? Isn't that what a drawing department is for? At least he was getting paid well, even for a simple job like this. After sending the revised files for review by the client, Tom leaned back and stared longingly out the window. The weather was fair, if a bit cold this afternoon, and hunting season was about to start this weekend. He wondered if any of the boys would be up for an early morning this Saturday. A picture of him and his home guard buddies stood on the windowsill. A few of them he had gone through the army with. Others had probably joined the guard just to get to play with guns. Well, he couldn't deny that a day at the range with friends was always fun, and the yearly exercises were usually a great time too. They were volunteers after all, and so were the people running the show. In short, it was like being a soldier without many of the hardships. He enjoyed it a lot. In fact, the time he spent with those guys was some of the best in recent memory, though that wasn't saying much. As of late, not much exciting had been happening in Tom's life after the army. He had finally made use of the engineering degree he'd earned to become an officer, and tried settling down. In some ways, it had been successful. He earned good pay, but he had cycled through many different roles. Production manager, the drafting department, RD, he had even worked on a damned oil rig. But none had managed to keep him hooked for long. It was simply too boring, even when the work was otherwise difficult or stressful. He always managed to get stuck in the monotony of the job. Sometimes it took weeks, other times months or years, but it always happened. He was almost always decent enough at the work, attacking problems with determination and discipline. He even managed to get promoted a few times when he stuck around long enough. And yet, here he was, back in his home office, doing freelance work again. He had often done this in the past between jobs. It made ends meet and kept him sort of busy. He missed the old days, even if his life had been on the line. Still, at least Head felt alive. He had tried too many things to list in an attempt to recapture the feeling of being in a firefight, but so far, nothing had gotten close. Not hunting, not parachuting, not even car racing. He felt like an old man in the middle of a midlife crisis, and he was only 37. Well, what can you do except keep going? At least if some of the boys come over, it would be a fun few hours in the outdoors, he thought to himself. He picked up his phone to ask the group chat if anyone was up for a little hunting. A smooth, soft voice spoke from behind him. You know, if you really want to live an exciting life, you're gonna need an exciting place to do it. Tom stiffened in his chair and slowly turned around to face the speaker, but there was no one there. As the voice spoke again, it had moved behind him once more. Come on. You know you don't want to waste away the few years you have left sitting here, staring at a screen waiting for something interesting to happen. Where was this voice coming from? Wait. He had his headset on and was listening to music, so how could he hear this guy so clearly? This didn't make any sense. And what on earth was the voice talking about? Show yourself. What makes you think you can just come into my house? Demanded Tom, now standing and looking around. Once again, the voice came from behind him, even as he turned to look for it. I am sorry, truly, but I can't exactly knock on the door, now can I? As for showing myself, well, that isn't really possible either. See, I'm not there. Well, who and or what are you supposed to be then? Don't tell me, I'm just talking with myself, right? Oh no, don't you worry, you're not that crazy. Yet, though it does feel like you are slipping in here. As for what? I'm not gonna tell you. So I am guessing you wormed your way inside my head. Well, this is just fucking marvelous. What do you want? It's more like, what do you want? See, I'm here with an offer for you. I want to run a little experiment. I'm working on a little project of mine, and I require a guinea pig. And you think I'm just gonna jump at the chance to be your test subject? Apparently, I'm not the crazy one here, Tom proclaimed, a bit of indignant anger in his voice. This was getting weird, really fast. What the hell was going on? Well, yes, the voice answered. It sounded quite condescending. Tom thought, you don't thrive in this environment. You need something new and different. You need experiences, and you have what I'm looking for. And what exactly would that be? Well, you are combat and survival trained, and well and educated. so you will hopefully survive long enough and have the ability to make an impact. What in the ever flying fuck are you talking about? And what do you mean hopefully survive? What I'm offering is to send you to another world for the purposes of seeing what would happen. I have long pondered the scenario and written many hypotheses, and I honestly don't know what will happen, so I will have to try it. To Tom, the voice was beginning to sound excited, too excited, especially for someone, contemplating his possible death. And in return for satisfying my curiosity, you get to go to the world of your dreams, well, at least as close as I could find. So you want me to leave everything, to go somewhere I know nothing about, on the request of a voice in my head, just because you think my life sucks? Yes, the voice answered, as if it was the most obvious conclusion in existence. Jesus fuck, man, you don't think much of me, do you? The voice sounded almost hurt. What do you mean? I already outlined why you are perfect for the job. You have no immediate family, and only a few friends, and the family you have left. Tom interrupted the voice. Don't you dare bring up my mother. I get your point already. So you will do it? No? Why would I trust you? Besides, how do you even plan on getting me anywhere? Well, I could just send you against your will, though I would rather not. Send me? As in poof? Yeah, pretty much. The voice sounded deadly serious, which sent a cold shiver down Tom's spine. This was beginning to look like a hostage situation. Not that that was entirely new to Tom. Still, it sucked. A lot. The thought that he might just go poof and end up somewhere he probably didn't want to be wasn't exactly comforting. What if I don't want to go? Will you just do it anyway? Nah, don't want to do that. Remember, I found you because you had nothing to live for here. Are you even aware of how not nice that sounds when you say it like that? But in that case, I think my answer is no. I don't trust you, and I don't see why I should. Will you at least allow me to show you? Could I stop you if I wanted to? Nope. Better hang on? Well, fine then, this should be good. You are aware I still don't think you are real, right? Just as Tom finished his sentence, a small dot flickered into existence in the middle of the office. It expanded rapidly, until it was a little under a meter in diameter. Slightly oval in shape, it acted like a vacuum. Wind poured through it into the office as if he were standing on top of a skyscraper in rough weather. As Tom looked through what he assumed was a portal, because why the hell not? In the middle of his goddamn office, he just stood there and glared. Well, fuck me, I guess. The scene that greeted him was like something out of James Cameron's Avatar mixed with Lord of the Rings. Tall spires stood atop floating islands. Honest-to-God floating islands. In the sky soared what looked like enormous birds, though he could not see what kind. Judging by how his day was going, they were probably dragons. With a whoosh of air, the portal shifted with far too much speed to comprehend. Tom was flung across the room as the wind hit him. He scrambled back to his feet, despite the pain of having just been slammed into a wall. His eyes locked back on the portal. It now showed a massive forest. This is roughly where you will end up. I can't tell you exactly where because, to be honest, I don't know where you will end up. Also, I wouldn't tell you about the world. You'll need to figure it out yourself. It's all part of the experiment. As the portal snapped shut with a thunderous crack, Tom stood dumbfounded. He had just seen a glimpse of an honest-to-God fantasy world, like in the movies and books had enjoyed so much when he was younger. Do you agree? If I go, will I ever get to return? Not until the experiment is complete, but in time. Maybe. What are your terms? Well, folks, without further ado, here is Chapter 2 of my little series. Hope you enjoy. As before, I don't actually know what I'm doing, so expect grammatical and spelling errors. That being said, if you find anything or have any critique, please level it down. Below it will be greatly appreciated. Hunter or Huntress. Chapter 2, Preparation. What are your terms? Tom's words rang out, silence hanging in the air for a second. Well, the voice answered gleefully, you'll need to prepare yourself for anything. Creating a portal capable of transport will be a costly affair, but cheaper the weaker the veil is. And with the next convergence being in a little over a week's time, I think you better get started. As evening rolled around, Tom sat at his trusty computer once again. Gone was the boring work, replaced by a dozen Google searches and web shops. He honestly didn't know why he had agreed to this. It was a stupid idea, but he'd had plenty of those in the past, and they had led to some of the greatest moments in his life. That being said, this was by far the worst one yet. He could bring whatever he wanted, but he had to be mobile in any terrain he found himself traversing. That meant no large vehicles. Besides, the fuel would likely have to be homemade in the future, so fuel economy and off-road mobility would be paramount. The quad bike he used to get around the property would be perfect with a few modifications, of course. With a trailer, it could carry several hundred kilos of cargo and enough fuel for over 1,000 kilometers off-road. If he hadn't found civilization by then, he was pretty fucked anyway. But what to bring? He needed to think not just short-term, but also long-term, far longer than he ever had to before on any trip. A laptop, power banks, a solar charger, a kinetic lamp, weapons, and lots of ammo. But what happened when the ammo ran out? Homemade is back on the menu then, he mused. That meant black powder, so anything semi or full auto was out of the question. It would just foul up the action, even if he could get it to run. But he still wanted stopping power in spades and a decent fire rate. A Marlin, it was then. You could never go wrong with a lever gun. That was probably the best gun he owned anyway. A shotgun would be a good idea too, even if it was just for hunting purposes. If it came to it, he could always chop the end off for some close quarters boom boom. He still owned an over-under he had had since he was 15. His first gun, in fact, and a gift from his father. It would serve once again. He would want a pistol too, though, and the same ammo concerns applied. Ah, what the hell, might as well go full cowboy. Big-ass revolver it is, he thought, chuckling to himself. He had always wanted one, but he hadn't had much reason to get one before now. To hell with it. Why not two? Any real cowboy carries at least two guns. Besides, what if one broke? Content with his self-justification, he placed his order for 2 Ruger Redhawks in .44 Magnum. There was no use skimping on firepower when you had no idea what the target would be. As he leaned back in his chair, he mused to himself that even if this was going to go horribly wrong, he would look awesome until the end. As the days went by, things started arriving. The bits he needed to convert the quad bike to run on alcohol for when the petrol ran out, various electronics, survival, tools, food, water, and containers to put everything in, all was loaded onto the quad and its nifty new little trailer. Even as he worked, Tom was still wondering if he had completely lost his mind. But, to be honest, he didn't care. This was exciting. Even if it was all a delusion, it was better than sitting around pretending everything was as it should be. No, this was right. It was what he wanted to do. It was going to be awesome and thrilling, with so many different challenges. Honestly, he couldn't wait for the day now. It was probably for the best that he had only been given a little over a week to prepare. The list was becoming longer and longer with every passing day. As he was packing the waterproof chest he had bought off eBay from a boating guy, he began to wonder what his chances actually were of getting to use calisters, materials, and engineering, or the calculus books for that matter. Still, he had been instructed to make ready for the long haul, and to make an impact on this world. If math and science couldn't do it, what chance did he have? It dawned on him that the people of this world might not even be able to read or write, or perhaps they were even more advanced than he was. If so, this would all just be dead weight, and a lot of it too. His little library consisted of around 30 large books and a few smaller ones by now, most either from his own collection or borrowed from the local library. It wasn't like they could come after him for not returning them anyway. It was a strange collection of science, history, and fiction, even if the merit of bringing a fantasy book to a fantasy world was a bit dubious. But a good story is worth its weight in gold, right? Oh, right, money. What would they use for money? What could he bring that would be valuable to an alien people? Paper? Salt? Well, he was already bringing those, but a bit extra wouldn't hurt. Perhaps spices and fine liquor. Yeah, that seemed smart. As his thoughts wandered, he began worrying about the physical attributes of the locals. Would they be human? Maybe not. Was he going to be dealing with full-blown aliens, or perhaps old-fashioned fantasy tropes? How would he communicate? He added a note to look into getting a book on communicating with primitives. What if they were so massive and armored that not even a rifle would do the trick? What if there were real dragons there? He didn't exactly have access to the base armory anymore, and even if he did, it would be hard to explain to the boys just why he needed to borrow. A recoilless rifle or a SAM launcher for recreational purposes, even if it could blow a hole in a dragon. No. He would have to make do with small arms. Besides, he would not be able to bring much ammo for such a weapon, or replenish it once fired. What good would it do if he couldn't carry it along? With the rest of his gear, he was already bringing more guns than one man could reasonably carry. Besides, if there were dragons there, wouldn't he want to tame one or make friends? Riding a dragon was up there with the wildest of childhood fantasies, and who doesn't like flying? He added a note to get something on animal training just in case. Besides, he might be the one who is physically superior. That was a funny thought, Superman with a rifle. Tom chuckled to himself a bit as he entertained the thought, continuing his prep work. As the day of reckoning drew near, Tom sat down one evening and wrote a note. Not that he wanted to, but if he wasn't coming back, the least he could do was try and assure anyone who cared that nothing catastrophic had happened, even if it wasn't true. Polls. To whomever may end up finding this, know that I'm fine. I just couldn't bear the monotony anymore. I needed to get out of here. So, I have gone to a place of wonders beyond measure, where I might again find life exciting and challenging, even if just for a while. Don't worry. I'm not insinuating that I harmed myself. Trust me, I'm fine where I have gone. I know it sounds weird, but don't bother trying to find me. You won't. This is what I want, and I'm not changing my mind anytime soon. One day, I might return. So, keep a chair free, just in case. Thomas Jensen. He folded up the piece of paper and laid it on his desk where it may be found in time. The next morning, Tom got up early. Do I have to do this? He thought to himself as he got ready. Yes, he did. It would likely be the last chance he got, and even if it didn't sit right, he would hate himself in the future if he didn't. Breakfast in hand, he walked out to the car, a nice older BMW 3 Series, and as he got in, the melancholy hit him. This was maybe the last time he would ever drive a car. Damn! He liked tearing up the back roads every now and again. On the route to the nursing home, he stopped off for some flowers. Red. She liked red if she could still remember that was. As Tom sheepishly knocked on the door, he squared his shoulders, took a breath, and waited. He stared down at the flowers, wondering how much she would remember today. Who is it? Came the familiar, frail voice from inside. It's Tom. I've got a present for you. There was a bit of commotion from inside, and after a short while, the door creaked open. I think I know a Tom. Who would that be? His mother replied as she stared up at him with a quizzical look in her eyes. Tom shed a tear. She had remembered something at least. That was good. Oh my goodness, how pretty they are. Are those for me? Oh, you handsome young boy, come in, come in. Would you like some tea or coffee maybe? As Tom walked in behind her, he quickly dried the tear away. Coffee, please. 3 sugars, he replied as he replaced last week's flowers in the vase on the table and sat down. So, how's your day going? After that, it was the usual routine of him trying to help explain as much as he could about what had been going on. The voice in his head. The royal family's visit to the town in a few weeks. The weird portal. The fact that Aunt Agustina had a son. Yes, he had pictures, and he was very sweet. And the many preparations for his trip. Yes, he was in fact her son. And yes, he knew he had grown big. On and on it went, just like always. He stayed as long as he could today, but by afternoon she had started getting worse. She was forgetting even what they had talked about just minutes before. He knew that was it for the day. This might be the last time he saw her, but he couldn't take it any longer. It was just getting to be too much. So he made his excuses, gave her a big hug and a kiss on the forehead, and said his goodbyes with a heavy heart. On the way home, he sobbed most of the way. He knew she would not be getting better, and soon she would be gone too. It wasn't fair. She couldn't fight it. It would just get worse and worse until one day he couldn't bear to be around when it happened. Losing Dad had taken a toll on him. He wouldn't go through it again. Besides, she wouldn't even know he wasn't there for her in the end. It felt like an excuse. Even if the argument was sound, it felt wrong. He just couldn't bear the thought of trying to comfort his dying mother while she hit him and shouted because she believed he had broken into her apartment, just as Dad had done. No, this is for the best, he thought. They were professionals at the care home. They specialized in dementia. They would do a better job than him. Chapter 3. Departure. The preparations were complete, and everything was here. He had everything from the book on wilderness farming, with its accompanying small seed bank, to the reloading equipment, the second-hand Russian NV goggles, and clothes for any weather imaginable. All of it was strapped to the Polaris 570 Sportsman and its trailer. The little vehicle would be his trusty steed and home for the foreseeable future. To say he was nervous was a damned understatement. But if anything, he was even more excited. He was fully kitted in his old uniform, looking like a damn action hero. He had bandoliers of 45-70 around his neck like fucking Rambo, twin revolvers, a belt full of 44 Magnum, and his rifle in hand. The short-dot scope and long-rail attachment made it look pretty tactical too, as the whole circus rolled out into the courtyard of the small country house. Tom was pretty proud of himself, even if he couldn't stop thinking about the sheer amount of boom currently in one place. The 6 jerry cans strapped to both the bike and trailer didn't help his fears, though the combined 138 liters of petrol should see him through at least 200 kilometers on decent roads, even with a trailer, and he hoped for around half that on off-road trails. He had packed 3 weeks' worth of food and 1 week's worth of water. He should have plenty of time and range to find civilization. If it exists, that is. He still hadn't decided if he had over or under-prepared, though honestly, under probably wasn't possible in this situation. What if he had missed something? It was statistically certain he would be cursing himself for something he forgot at some point in the future. But there was not much to do about that now. "Well, I see you have been busy." Tom stiffened for a short moment at hearing the voice before relaxing again. "That was pretty difficult to get used to. You said I should prepare for anything, so I did. Now is it time to get this party started, or what? You sound a lot more enthusiastic now than you did a week ago. Shame to waste the motivation. Let's get started. It should be fairly simple. On my mark, you charge the opening. It will only be open for a short while. Oh, and be sure to hit the middle. We don't want any part left behind, now do we?" "Certainly not." "Guessing I should duck too, huh?" Tom mounted the quad bike and fired it up. It purred like a kitten. As the familiar dot appeared a few meters in front of him, it quickly grew to around 3 meters in diameter and descended into the ground. The weird voice sounded in the back of Tom's head. "You better get going now." He jammed the throttle, powering into the unknown and kicking up dirt and gravel. As he hit the portal, he got the feeling he was being one hell of an idiot this time. The feeling of passing through whatever that portal thing was certainly wasn't enough to sell him on the idea that this was, in fact, a smart move. It felt like running through an ice storm in his underpants while being hit by rocket exhaust from behind. As his vision went white and he gasped in pain, he squinted and held up his hands, shielding his eyes from the bright light for a second before his vision returned. The pain faded just as fast as it had arrived, but he still felt like shit. Coasting to a stop in the lush undergrowth of a seemingly grand forest, he fell off the quad bike. He just managed to pull down the bandana he had over his mouth before puking on the ground. He thought to himself, well, this isn't the most auspicious arrival ever. He felt like he had been through a washing machine. His head was spinning as he tried to get to his feet. He could barely make it onto all fours, swaying from side to side. In the end, he just crawled away from the puddle he had made and rolled over onto his back, staring up into the treetops. As he looked up, he suddenly felt pretty damn small. The trees looked like giant redwoods, only they had leaves, huge leaves in fact, and they stretched for what seemed like forever up into the sky. God, that must be 100 meters at least, he thought to himself as he kept staring. Around him, smaller trees were scattered loosely in between the tall monsters. Those seemed like fairly normal trees, though. He recognized a few birches and an oak here and there. Okay, he thought to himself. At least some of the flora seems familiar. That's good, not completely alien. As he lay there admiring the view of an alien sky through the treetops of an alien forest, his head slowly stopped spinning. As he moved to get up, he felt the thickest, softest moss he had ever felt beneath his hands. It was almost like foam. Well, sleeping is going to be comfortable at least, he mused to himself. Getting up, he was still a bit unsteady on his feet as he looked around. The scene was truly breathtaking. It was definitely a forest, but not dense like one would expect. It felt almost like being inside a huge hall with trees and bushes scattered loosely around the place. It was open and airy, which felt a bit strange. but he knew better than to look a gift horse in the mouth. This terrain would make travel a lot easier than he had feared. Maybe I should have brought a 4x4 instead anyway, he thought. Oh well, no turning back now. As he began to walk, driven by curiosity, he noticed his steps were lighter, a lot lighter. Everything was. Even his backpack felt as if there were almost nothing in it. As he made an experimental jump, he went way higher than he would have expected. The gravity? He exclaimed. As he landed, he took another jump, this time pushing off with all that he had, and he made it more than a meter off the ground in full combat gear. Of all the things he had been expecting, this was not on the list. He thought to himself, right, I'm gonna need a game plan here. First and foremost, bearings. There was no way he could climb one of the giant trees, even if gravity was on the light side, and the forest floor seemed flat, so there wouldn't be a vantage point. He pulled up his compass and blank map book. To his relief, the compass seemed to work well enough. It was at least pointing in a direction. He marked down a point on the brand new map of who knows where. First explorer Tom Columbus coming through, he laughed to himself. With that, it was time to get moving. Even if it was pretty as all hell here, there wasn't much of interest around. Picking west, he set off into the unknown, his trusty steed thumping along at a decent lick. The lighter gravity didn't do traction any favors, but that is what four-wheel drive is for. As the hours rolled by, the scenery didn't change much. Eventually, he found a watering hole and spotted his first piece of fauna, a rabbit-looking thing drinking on the far side of the little lake. The thing had little deer antlers, though. Tom was sure he had heard about something like that, even if he couldn't remember what the little buggers were called. It quickly scampered off, likely scared by all the noise. He stopped for a cold, refreshing drink and a lunch break, spending the time admiring the terrain and trying to work out what time of day and season it was. His watch claimed 12:34, and the sun seemed high in the sky, so it wasn't off by too much. As he sat for a while and continued to admire his surroundings, he thought, perhaps this was a good idea after all. He marked the little lake on his now very detailed map, which currently contained a whole 2 points of interest and a single line between them marking course and distance. Then, he packed up to continue moving. As the hours went by and the light began fading, Tom made camp for the day near one of the massive trees. He set up his little tent and dug a small fire pit. He was going to enjoy his first evening in an alien world with the small amount of fresh food he had brought, specifically, a steak. As he settled down, he found himself staring into the now dark and gloomy forest, listening to the woods. Throughout the day, all the weird noises had been drowned out by the roar of his quad bike. Now, he finally had the time to appreciate just how alien the soundscape was. There was a little bird song and a bit of rustling here and there. Some kind of colorful hedgehog came barreling along the forest floor at one point, probably looking for an evening snack. A strange cooing echoed between the trees, likely from another bird of some sort. It sounded hauntingly beautiful, almost like the sound Tom would expect to hear from a ghost singing opera. As he tucked in for the night, he laid his rifle beside him, just in case, and wondered exactly what this place had in store for him. As morning broke and he got himself ready for the day, Tom thought to himself, I should do some exploring on foot if I want to see what kind of wildlife this place has to offer, besides weird rabbits and hedgehogs. As he packed for the day, he grabbed just his weapons and a backpack, with what he would need if he ended up camping out for the night. His spirits were high as he checked his compass. He was going to be heading north today to avoid doubling back when he went west again later, but as he pulled out his compass to take a bearing, the little red tip for north was nearly lined up with the westward course he had been taking yesterday. What? He shouted at the uncaring forest, thoroughly confused and glaring at his compass. How could this be? Had he fucked up yesterday? Chapter 4. Fight or Flight. Tom sat back down, contemplating what exactly had gone wrong. If he couldn't trust his compass, maintaining a direction would be incredibly difficult, especially in a forest. He elected to run a little experiment to test his equipment. He cleared some ground, set down the offending item, and marked north in the dirt with a 0. He then set a timer for 1 hour on his wristwatch and made ready to entertain himself. He spent the day checking his compass and his immediate surroundings. He found some berries and tried one to see if they were poisonous. So far, nothing bad had happened, and it had tasted fine, if a little sour. He guessed they were safe. His first alien fantasy food, he thought with a grin. The compass readings, however, were troubling. The needle had been moving seemingly randomly throughout the day, and the deflection had maxed out at 41 degrees. There was no telling if even that deflection could be counted on. At this rate, the tool would be completely useless. As he sat pondering this development and the predicament it caused, he heard a branch snap to his left. He looked up to see a young deer. Or was it? It had too many markings. A black and white stripe ran along its back, and it still carried the white dots of a fawn. Its legs were longer too. It seemed almost too slender even for a deer, like a big-budget Bambi. The two stood there for a moment, locked in a stare, until the deer decided this was a dangerous situation. It scampered off through the woods, in extraordinary bounding leaps of over 10 meters. It was moving fast, far faster than any deer had ever seen. As Tom stood there for a while, mouth half agape contemplating the wildlife, his belly rumbled in protest to only receiving one berry for lunch. Might as well put the rifle to use, he thought. As long as he didn't stray too far from the camp, it shouldn't be a problem. With that, he set out to tail the deer from a distance. Because of the large trees, resulting in relatively open spaces, there would be plenty of easy shots. It only took about 30 minutes to track down the deer, which seemingly hadn't run far, apparently not judging him to be much of a threat. Well, that was about to be a costly mistake, Tom thought. He wondered what something so delicate-looking might taste like. The crack of the rifle rang out in the forest, echoing between the trees. The deer tensed, setting off into a stumbling run. It didn't get far. The shot had hit square in the shoulder blade, turning the heart and other vital organs to mush and staining the ground with a spray of blood. Honestly, this gun was overkill for the task, but it was what he had brought. The deer tasted just like deer fine, if a little disappointing that it hadn't been some kind of magically delicious treat. Still, it made a good dinner with the addition of some powdered mashed potatoes and some of the many spices he had brought with him for trade purposes. There was meat for quite a while left over too. The compass had continued to veer around within the previously recorded maximum deflection from normal. As Tom hit the sack for the night, his mind was racing. What could cause a compass to veer like that? It was almost like a weather vane blowing in the wind. God damn it! The loud protest seemingly fell on deaf ears. Piatis Meriasted T. Emmy on one of those floating islands I saw, and it's not staying put. Fuck! The next morning, Tom butchered the deer to the best of his ability. Even if it really should have had time to hang a bit longer than a single night, it was still food, and he knew he should be rationing the supplies. That could last indefinitely. With that finished, he mounted his trusty quad and set out to try and keep his direction the old-fashioned way. If the whole landscape was moving, not even the sun or moon would be useful, not that either was easily spotted through the dense canopy. Instead, he relied on following paths and lining up trees. As the hours went by, he felt he was making progress. At least he had not yet had any moments of déjà vu. Shortly after lunch, he found what seemed to be the foot of a small mountain or cliff. As he looked up, it appeared tall enough to reach above the forest canopy. This was an opportunity he couldn't miss, as he desperately needed a vantage point. So, once again, he left his quad behind. Luckily, rope and basic climbing equipment were among the things he had packed for the trip. It wasn't a very difficult climb either, not terribly steep and with plenty of handholds, and the low gravity certainly didn't hurt. Though it seemed like an awfully long way up, at least 100 to 110 meters to the top by his reckoning, he made steady time. He had left his rifle behind, as it wasn't easy to climb with it slung over his shoulder, but he did bring his small backpack with some food and water. He had made it no more than 20 meters up before he started hearing wing beats coming from behind him. He turned to look and was confronted by ghastly-looking winged creatures. Each had 2 legs and wings like a bat, with terrifying claws on all of them. Their leathery skin was a reddish-black, featuring 4 front-facing crimson-red eyes and a long tail with a nasty-looking spike at the end. And he was facing multiple of the buggers. With wings spanning nearly 4 meters, they weren't exactly small, even if the creatures themselves seemed about his size. As the first one came in tail first, looking to stab him, he dropped down into the rope harness. He fell a few meters, causing the creature to overshoot. He drew a revolver. But even as he was taking aim, the next came screeching in, skewering him in the side of his abdomen just under his vest. It latched onto the cliff with its wing claws and went to bite at his face. He just managed to bring the gun up under its chin and blew its head to pieces, covering himself in gore in the process. The stab in the gut hurt like hell, and he screamed out, "Well, fuck you too," as the now limp monster went tumbling to the ground. Looking up, he saw the first one going for the rope. He brought up the gun to fire, but his arm struggled to move. It felt like it was stiffening up. He and the creature raced to finish their tasks. He felt the rope give way just as he got the gun on target. The shot went wide with the lurch of the rope snapping, and he only clipped the thing in the wing. Now falling, he thought to himself that this wasn't quite how he had planned this trip to end, struggling to come to terms with the fact that he was likely about to die. As he fell, a third creature swooped in and stabbed him again. This time, in the thigh, latched its claws around his waist and heaved to carry its quarry away. As Tom's body finally succumbed to the second dose of the poison, he stiffened up completely. Looking at the ground, he swore he heard more of the things chittering to each other in some weird, guttural tone. Where were they going? And was that shouting coming from behind him? Estrojectin. Was it shouting coming from behind him? Estrojexes. Having your target sneak up on you instead was a mark of disgrace for any hunter. Yet, that was exactly what appeared to have happened to them. Sapphire and her hunting party were resting on the small cliff top they had so often used to eat their midday snack, lazily catching what heat they could from the sun. The surprise was total. Sapphire rushed to her feet at the sound of a thunderous crack, but it was a perfectly clear day had it come from below. Fengi shouted out, claiming she had heard what sounded like shouting coming from further down the cliff. There was definitely something going on down there. As they all scrambled to pack their things away, Dakota took the lead. "On me!" she bellowed in her signature commanding voice. As the 5-strong hunting party dove off the side of the cliff, racing toward the commotion below, Sapphire readied her bow. Another loud thundercrack sounded. It was definitely coming from further down the cliff. As they broke through the canopy, they were confronted by 5 Vargulfs, seemingly already turning to flee. "Looks like they're running," shouted Esmeralda. "Well, don't let them," replied Dakota, the queen of the hunt. She took the lead, pulling out of the dive to give chase through the woods with her bow at the ready. Looking back at the cliff where the noise had come from, Sapphire saw what looked like a rope dangling from the cliff face. One Vargulf was already on the ground, with another following close behind it, tumbling to its inevitable doom. "They grabbed someone, I think. There are 2 dead beasts and a cut rope back there," she shouted out to the others. "Well then, we better catch them. If nothing else, I want to know who has been wandering around in our backyard," replied Dakota. "What kind of maniac goes climbing this far into the woods?" Jackalope piped up. "And how did he get here?" Esmeralda added. As the hunters gave chase, their initial dive did buy them some ground. Those bastards were quick, though at least in a straight line, but the lead Vargulf did seem to be carrying something, though Sapphire couldn't tell what it was exactly. Most likely the unlucky climber, and probable moron, though he had killed 2 already. "Lead guys got the cargo. Try not to kill it." "I have questions," Dakota shouted in response. At least the weight it was slowing it down a bit, Sapphire thought. As the Huntresses gave chase, firing at the trailing Vargulfs, who was trying to protect the one carrying their precious cargo. Whatever it was, the bastards wanted it badly, enough to risk their own skin too. The Canuck sight, he can understand his avans, with created puns, and Telaga's office could his the time. The sounds coming from behind them were muffled by the air, so he couldn't make out much other than the fact that there was something back there. That is when they started taking fire. Okay, it was only arrow fire, but that could mean only one thing. There were civilized people giving chase. This could be very good or very bad, but going by his current situation, anyone trying to kill the monster bat things was a good guy in his book. The monster ducked and dived through the trees, desperately trying to create distance while avoiding being shot. It was doing well so far. If not for the paralysis, the gut wound, and the incoming arrows, Tom would have thought the ride thrilling with all its speed and acrobatics. As it was, he was starting to get concerned about what would happen if one of those arrows hit its mark. The ground seemed an awfully long distance away. Because she felt the thrill of the hunt. She was right on them, and they would not be getting away this time. As she let loose arrow after arrow, one finally flew true, hitting a Vargulf in the back. It screeched in pain, crimson streaming from the wound. She could almost taste it in the air, flicking out her tongue in anticipation. As the beast began to slow, Dakota put another shot into it, hitting a shoulder joint. The vile creature's right wing buckled, and it fell to the ground with a heavy thump, screaming all the way down. 1 down, 4 to go. Despite the success, the speed was taking a toll on the hunters. Sapphire was panting heavily already, and Fengi had begun to lose ground, being the youngest among them. Vargulfs were no joke in a straight line. They wouldn't be able to keep up much longer. Not at this speed. It would be a shame to only get 2, though, even if whatever was being carried off had already taken another 2 today. But the Kroinkan city at his ride had Denimatyne covered the lands of any of the Jarmans. He began frantically trying to work out what he could do in this situation. Why didn't he bring the parachute from the trailer? God damn it, he proclaimed, stunned for a second that his mouth had started working again. Apparently, the paralysis stuff wasn't very long-term. He began struggling to move his limbs and slowly started making progress, making sure not to lose his grip on the beautiful new revolver still clenched tightly in his right hand. The creature seemed too preoccupied with its own descent to notice its quarry beginning to wiggle. The same, however, could not be said for the nearest of its companions. Tom heard screeching from behind him, and it sounded as if it was getting closer fast. Forcing his arms to obey, he bent down despite the catastrophic pain in his abdomen. Grabbing the gun with both hands, he took aim as best he could. Looking back, he saw the tail spike of yet another creature coming straight for his face. On sheer reflex, he pulled the trigger. By some kind of miracle, he blew the end of the tail clean off and missed his own foot by millimeters. Now, though, his ride seemed to have noticed its cargo was awake, tightening its grip on his stomach and shaking him violently. He couldn't just shoot it. That would doom him to a slow death by falling, and he was being flailed around far too much to do any precision shooting, even at this range. Instead, he drew his knife with his offhand and tried his damnedest to land a stab on the body of the thing. It was an awkward situation, almost like trying to hit someone who was clinging to your back. Tom squirmed in the creature's claws, trying to land a hit. He nicked the thing a few times, but nothing managed to do more than scratch its hide. This isn't going brilliantly, he thought to himself, fighting through the pain on an adrenaline high. Apparently, the creature agreed. As it rounded one of the large tree trunks, it circled back, heading straight for their pursuers. The G-forces in the turn were not to be sniffed at, and Tom found himself struggling to raise his head to see. As it came around, Tom looked up, catching just a glimpse of something white and blue streaking towards him. As the creature threw him at his pursuer, "She!" was all he managed to think before impact. Before impact. As a flash of fire burst out from under the lead Vargulf, the blast took the tail off one of the following beasts with it. What was a magic user doing on the ground in the middle of their hunting grounds? They needed to take it alive, she thought. It might be a spy or some other nefarious thing. "What the hell was that?" exclaimed Jackalope. "Magic, I think," Esmeralda added helpfully. "Tell you what, if you're the one to catch it, I'll let you ask first. Now get it," Dakota ordered, letting loose another arrow at the wounded Vargulf. The beast was seemingly too preoccupied with finding its tail, and Dakota dropped it with a shaft to the neck. Sapphire had managed to close the range with the lead Vargulf, which was clearly struggling with its now moving passenger. She turned to flank it around the grand oak. As she rounded the massive tree, what greeted her wasn't the clean shot she had been hoping for. Instead, she got a face full of whatever the blasted creature had been carrying. Had she been tricked by a Vargulf? And of it was an Ackley after own. Gang! The blow still knocked the air out of her though, and she felt her ribs cracking. It was a deep, disorienting pain, and she wondered what had just happened to her. She was not that high in the air and would be dropping fast. The thing that had hit her clung to her, shaking her by the shoulders and shouting. It seemed very distraught. What a weird language, she thought, before snapping back to her senses and drawing breath again. It hurt like hell, her cracked or broken ribs protesting loudly, but training took over. Any real flyer knew what to do when things went wrong. She tucked in her wings and used her tail to counter the spin they were currently in. She was heading straight for the ground, and it was a lot closer than she had remembered. Cursing the seconds she had lost in the daze, she flared her wings, trying desperately to pull up. The thing clinging to her sure didn't help. Its weight was way too far forward. Damn thing. It was going to get them both killed, though she realized that if she were without wings in a crash dive, she would probably be clinging to the nearest thing that could fly too. That was little comfort, however. She had been too slow to react, and the creature wouldn't move despite being told they were going to hit. At least the clinging creature will hit first, she thought grimly. He'd been kidnapped, gored in the gut, poisoned, shaken like a dog's toy, used as an air-to-air missile, and was now heading for the ground, clinging to a half-unconscious dragon-looking thing. The creature had at least begun to wake up around halfway down. The initial impact in the air must have knocked it out, and it was now seemingly fighting not to turn into a pancake upon hitting the ground, from his current position grabbing onto its neck and hanging on for dear life. Tom couldn't see how well that particular battle was going. He soon got his answer as he slammed into the earth back first. The hit knocked the breath out of him once again. They rolled across the terrain, dirt and moss flying everywhere, as the sound of cracking bone and screaming filled the air. Tom added his own voice to the choir when his right shoulder was knocked out of its joint, causing him to finally lose his grip on his ad hoc transportation. He gasped for air as the world began to blacken around the edges. Yeah, the smeen that any seds, the 30 as o smeen that any seds of Voshi. Yeah, he gasped for errors, the world begans. And the Sapphire came too. She was on the ground, and the pain was immense. She looked up to see Esmeralda looking worriedly at her with a grimace on her face. No, that is not supposed to look like that. Oh, the older Huntress shuddered, looking at her. When Sapphire tried to move, she was met with sharp pain from her right wing and leg protesting the movement, in addition to her badly bruised chest. Forcing herself to sit up with a grunt, she inspected the damage. Her right wing was utterly broken with pieces of bone sticking out, a torn membrane, and several broken digits. Oh no, she thought to herself, her spirits sinking. She would be grounded for weeks at best, if not months. When she looked down, she found her shin broken too. Apparently, it had gotten stuck at an awkward angle during the tumble. So she wouldn't be walking either. Marvelous. But at least she was alive, and that had been quite the fall. She looked over to the crash site to see the thing sitting up with one of its hands in the air, seemingly not ready to pick another fight. Damn it, she cursed to herself. She would have loved to pay him back for her busted wing, or perhaps have one of the others do it for her, given her current condition. As Jackalope came over and proclaimed, "Ouch, you don't look brilliant," all Sapphire could do was stare at her with the sort of indignant rage reserved for people who didn't know when to shut up. "How many got away?" she demanded, trying to switch the subject away from her current predicament. "2. Not bad, all things considered. We got the one that so graciously knocked you out of the sky." Jackalope seemed quite pleased with the result. Yay, I have been avenged," Sapphire replied, not a grain of amusement in her tone. One bought stelning segation in her tone. He was down one gun and his knife, he hurt like hell, and he was now staring at a drawn bow. He had raised his hands the best he could despite his less than fully functional arm, and he was sitting up to look at his captors. Or were they saviors? They were dragon-like for sure, but no taller than him. Well, with the horns, maybe a little. They were humanoid just like him, but with wings on their backs. They were all a whitish silver color, varying a little between them, with horns that were dark blue and almost metallic looking. A lighter blue to turquoise-ish color ran down their necks and chests along what seemed like interlocking plates. Big scales, he guessed. They were wearing armor of some description, though it looked more for show than practicality. The armor consisted of what he could best describe as a tiara, a breastplate that stopped above the midriff for some reason, greaves, gauntlets, and a skirt of what looked like thick, dark blue leather plates. They all carried bows and some sort of big dagger or short sword. The metal part of the armor had a white, enamel-like finish to it, with copper, silver, or gold inlay depending on the person. It was all very intricately made, too. All in all, they looked quite dapper. They were very slenderly built, but more like an Olympic runner than anything else. It didn't hurt, of course, that they even looked quite feminine. They just screamed high-speed flying. The one looking at him, and not pointing a bow at him, spoke in a guttural tone. It almost sounded like Russian, he thought. The voice was feminine, though. As he pondered if he had just been rescued or captured by flying dragon Amazons, it dawned on him that he was being held at bow point by people he couldn't talk with, and who looked decidedly militaristic, if stylish. Well, this complicates things, he thought. He pointed at his ear with his good hand and shook his head. "I can't understand you." The one talking simply face-palmed, before throwing her head back toward the sky and letting out a long sigh, seemingly about as pleased with the situation as Tom was. She turned to talk to the injured one. Sal was a six-mosity of a sieve. Sal was a CEMPEC. She turned to talk to the injured one. She turned to talk to the injures. It can't speak properly, Dakota sighed, turning to Sapphire. How are you feeling, Saf? To be honest, not brilliant. And I'm not going to be flying or walking anytime soon, Sapphire replied, trying not to sound defeated. Accidents happen. To be honest, I haven't seen that maneuver before. It was quite well done, the way it used the tree to hide its trap, Dakota said, sounding as if she was already working to use the new discovery to her advantage. I'm glad you found my crash educational, Sapphire replied indignantly as she further inspected the damage. It would need to be set and braced before the natural healing started, and they were quite far from home, and it hurt like hell. I think that weird thing could help. It seems to know some magic. Let's try and find out, Dakota replied, looking back at the thing that had downed her best flyer. Canicles, one never, 120 fother. He really needed a better name for them than that, he thought. The one he had ridden on his way down did not look great. Its wing was definitely busted, and its leg was fucked too. He wondered what they were going to do now. One of them turned and looked at him. He figured it was probably the leader, since it had more gold worked into its armor than the others. It pointed at the injured one with a very demanding look in its eyes and muttered a single word in its language. Tom took it to mean fix or something like that. He hadn't brought anything besides a basic first aid kit, but he figured the least he could do was try to help. He nodded, got up, and tried to walk over to a nearby tree, only to be stopped by the one still pointing a bow at him. He pointed at his own shoulder and made a grimace to indicate pain, then pointed at the tree. The dragon thing looked quizzical, tilting its head before backing away a bit. Tom had tried the procedure before. That didn't make it any more comfortable, of course. Reseating a shoulder by slamming it into a tree was painful. But on the third try, he managed it. With a loud pop and a shout of satisfying pain, he regained the use of his arm, at least somewhat. His guard had seemed alarmed by the act and moved to stop him right as the joint slipped back into place, reaching out a hand but realizing what had been done and quickly retreating, drawing its bow again. Tom stumbled over to the wounded. Dragonette. Yes, Dragonette. Not quite a dragon, but pretty close. It would do for now anyway. He removed his backpack, took out the first aid kit, and set to work. That looks like healer supplies, and he seems quite hurt too. Esmeralda's input was, as always, appreciated, if often quite obvious. Still, it was better than nothing, and the materials looked to be of excellent quality. As the creature worked, its fingers seemed so soft and delicate. They were warm too, if not for the pain. It would actually have been quite comfortable. It didn't have claws either, which was nice. But because it only had healing supplies, Dakota would have to lend a hand. Even if she wasn't the most capable healer, she could, at the very least, close a wound to prevent infection. It was at times like these that Sapphire regretted Nunuk had gotten too old to go on hunts. Her spellcraft would have been greatly appreciated. Looking at the thing currently working on her wing, she realized its clothes were soaked through with blood. The green and black cloth it wore had done well to hide the fact. If you want to question this thing, he needs attention. That doesn't look good. Ill live for now. Also, I think it's bleeding red. The sword, Manus, finding, and because he only fought in the middling Perthex, on his back. Not quite sure what to make of the situation, he raised his hands again, only to have his shirt lifted to reveal the damage to his gut. He struggled to get a closer look at the injury. It looked quite bad, though he figured it could have been worse. The creature's claws had almost managed to enclose his waist while carrying him, resulting in deep scratch marks and small punctures rather than a full impalement. His vest had also absorbed some of the impact, even if the stinger had naturally hit just below it. At least his captors seemed interested in his survival, which was a plus. Seemingly quite worried by the damage, one had begun applying pressure to the wound, a surprisingly large amount of pressure at that. Another brought him his first aid kit. He grabbed the kit, pulled out the disinfectant, and began applying it liberally to the wounds. When he had tried to apply bandages, though, they stopped him. The leader had come over and began a low, muttering chant. His eyes widened and his lips curled into a smile. He practically screamed inside himself. They got magic. Ouch! Hell yeah! It only seemed to knit together the skin though. The pain was still there. Still, very useful against infections, he thought to himself. As he got up with a groan, his guard drew their bow again. He really needed to make friends here, he thought. These were the first people he had met, after all, and he certainly wasn't in fighting shape. Stumbling back over to his backpack, his thigh still hurting like hell, he pulled out some trail mix and jerky and offered it to the one guarding him. It seemed to be the youngest, with mostly copper inlay in its armor and leathery skin that was closer to white than silver. Food, he tried, watching as the creature lowered its bow and carefully took the items, looking at them quizzically. Tom pulled out another bag of trail mix and opened it, pouring a few nuts and dried berries into his hand and eating them. The dragonette followed suit, inspecting the bag closely. It looked quite pleased by the taste once it got the contents out, though the bag appeared to be even more interesting than the food. Two of the others came over to try the snacks immediately. That was a good sign. At least he had something to barter with. He took out a pair of painkillers to take the edge off and offered one to the wounded dragonette along with some water. The creature seemed more interested in the bottle though, saying something in its alien tongue and bowing its head. He showed himself taking the painkiller, and the dragonette followed suit, washing it down with some of the water. The leader continued to work on the dragonette's injuries, sparing a squinted look at Tom every now and again, as if she were trying to figure him out. And this looks like dried meat of some kind, because I cake curls that someone 10 day the most of very ed head. It's got food, nuts and berries, I think. Don't recognize any of them though, and this looks like dried meat of some kind. As Fengi took a bite of the strange meat, her eyes flared. How does that taste so good? The childlike wonder in her voice got the attention of Jackalope and Esmeralda, drawing them over to try the snacks. Sapphire was left sitting there pouting while Dakota worked. Wing broken, leg broken, and now the others were harvesting the reward from the guy she had practically saved? Not fair. There was wide consensus that this guy knew how to make snacks, that was for sure. Next, he took out a dark green bottle, walked over to Sapphire, and gave it to her. Thank you, she responded, bowing her head slightly and looking at the strange bottle. It was not metal or glass, that was certain, but she had no idea what it was. It didn't look like skin or leather either, at least none that she knew. Was it medicine? The stranger reached over and unscrewed the top for her. No cork? He gave her a small bead and took a similar one himself, looking at her expectantly. That must be medicine. She ate the thing and drank. It was nice, clean water, and the bead didn't taste of anything. Strange medicine, she thought. That stuff was usually horrid, though the bottle was even more interesting. He then pulled out some sort of rectangular object wrapped in a very thin, strange material. It was very colorful too, almost like silk. As he ripped it open, he revealed a small bar of what looked like grains stuck together. She nearly winced. It had looked so pretty. He handed it to her and made an eating motion. As she put it in her mouth, it was nice and crunchy. And sweet. There was honey in it. Normally that would be reserved for feasts and celebrations, yet he just had some in his pack and gave it away? Did he even know what that was worth? Perhaps he really was grateful for the rather ungraceful ride down. He's got honey too, so? Everything had been well received. Lucky for him, he had bought snacks for the climb. The muesli bar had been an especially big hit. Maybe they had a sweet tooth? After the wounded one had spoken out in surprise, the others looked like they were practically demanding a piece of it. He had taken out another one for them to share, since it seemed only fair that the one responsible for saving his ass got one for itself, especially since that act hadn't been entirely voluntary. The food had done the trick though, and tensions seemed to have eased. They didn't seem hostile, just wary of him, so he probably wasn't a hostage. Probably. With that, he thought it was time to try to get to know his rescuers a bit better. He had started with the classic, pointing to himself and saying, "Tom," then looking expectantly at the dragonettes. It didn't take long for them to figure it out. They seemed smart enough, he thought to himself. Apparently, the one who had saved him from death by pancake was named Ulhartiki at least. He thought so. Their language was very strange and guttural. She had pointed at a small, dark blue gem embedded in a thick leather necklace around her neck, and then at herself. It looked like a sapphire to Tom, so Sapphire it was. A nice name, he thought. Sapphire, he responded, pointing at the gem. She chuckled a bit at this. His language probably sounded just as funny to her as hers did to him. The leader had pointed to herself and proclaimed Dakota. She had then proceeded to point at the rest of the group in turn. Fengi, Esmeralda, Jackalope. Jackalope? Tom exclaimed, tilting his head to indicate his confusion. He knew that, 1, it was that little rabbit creature with antlers. But how did he know that word here? He made a gesture toward the one apparently named Jackalope, mimicking antlers with his fingers and squatting down. She gave a little laugh at the display and nodded. Were there words that were the same, he wondered? Dakota also sounded familiar, something to do with Native Americans, but he wasn't entirely sure. Dakota, for her part, looked at him quizzically upon his discovery of a common word. The names also sounded feminine. He certainly couldn't imagine a guy named Sapphire. Jackalope maybe, but for now he concluded he had been rescued by magical, flying Amazon dragonettes. Thinking about it, it sounded like an old comic from the 60s. This was insanity on a level he hadn't dared to expect. The one who had been guarding him, called Fengi apparently, had offered some food of her own, an eclectic collection of dried meat without much flavor, some tough, chewy roots, nuts he didn't recognize, and some kind of drink in a horn. It tasted very herbal and woody, almost like pine or spruce. He didn't exactly appreciate the taste. It seemed like a weird beer or something. There was alcohol in there too, though not much, a few percent tops. One more thing they had in common, he thought. This was good, since he had brought a few bottles of rum and whiskey for trading purposes. Good alcohol had always been worth something throughout human history. But he had more pressing matters at the moment than the local culinary specialties. He needed to get cleaned up, as he was still covered in gore, though the dragonettes didn't seem to mind. He also needed to find a proper doctor, or something similar, to look at his gut wounds. Those things could turn nasty, even if the injury was currently sealed. He was no medic, so he didn't know much about how to fix people beyond keeping them alive long enough to get them to proper medical personnel. He began wondering if he could get them to take him back to his quad bike. As he looked at them, he would not have deemed them capable of lifting someone like himself or Sapphire, at least not for long. But gravity was weird here. If not for those few seconds of unconsciousness, it seemed like Sapphire might have actually succeeded in avoiding the ground. He just hoped they didn't leave him here. He had no idea how to find his way back to the bike. As he stood there, lost in his own thoughts for a moment, he snapped back to attention. It was clear that decisions were being made without him, and he had no idea what they were planning. Well, this is no good, he thought to himself. He managed to get the attention of Fengi and tried making mountain gestures with his hands, pointing to his backpack, and then gesturing around the ground as if to indicate more backpacks. The dragonette seemed to get the message and joined the discussion with the others. Before they decided to leave, though, he wanted to find his gun and knife. They couldn't have gone far. It was a most peculiar being. It was clad from head to toe in fabric. It even had gloves and boots on. Was it so squishy that it needed that much protection? It had no scales, certainly, but the thin fabric had done little to protect it from the Vargul's attacks. Then there were the colors: green, black, and various browns. Dirty colors, clearly not a very proud being, but the patterns were intricate, and most of its clothes shared the design. Was it some weird form of artistic expression? Or perhaps a symbol of a family? It looked like it would blend in well with the forest, though, so perhaps the choice was for practical purposes. If I were stuck on the ground, I wouldn't mind remaining hidden, she thought. It also had what looked like crests on its shoulders and breast, maybe clan or family crests, or perhaps a nation. It also wore a weird helmet that didn't cover the face at all. I think it's a soldier. Dakota turned her head to Sapphire. And what would a soldier of a seemingly faraway land be doing here? I don't recognize anything on him, so it must be very far from home. Jackalope joined in. And how exactly did he get so far from home? He definitely can't fly. Somebody ferried him here, Esmeralda added helpfully. And why would anybody ferry a soldier who can't speak our tongue across the world to run around on the forest floor? Dakota was clearly not convinced. As the others continued to bicker, Fengi got out some of her own snacks and gave them to the creature, along with some of her spruce beer. It seemed thankful, though its face did look funny when he tried the beer. Fengi chuckled. Seems the beer wasn't a hit. It hardly seems hostile. What if he ended up here by accident? Sapphire added from the stone she had been placed on. And why was he climbing up to us? Perhaps he was sneaking up on us, Jackalope retorted. In the middle of the day? By climbing up a cliff? If that is true, it would be crazy enough to still be trying to kill us. Sapphire was struggling to find a reason why it was out here. It didn't make sense. So what now? Esmeralda said, getting to the core of the problem as usual. At this point, Fengi piped up again. I think he wants to go back to the cliff. It looks like they have more stuff there, and they're looking for something too. Seems they dropped it. How could he have more stuff back there? They could hardly carry much more if it is out trekking alone. Dakota did not sound convinced. Maybe he has more honey back there? Maybe he has a cart or something? Jackalope concluded, sounding very excited about the prospect. Fine, well, go back. It's not like it's in the wrong direction. I don't think we'll make it home tonight anyway, so we might as well camp on the cliff. We are going to bring him home with us. Maybe Apuma will know what it is. There was a collective sigh from the group as it dawned on them that they would be taking turns carrying 2 people and camping under the open sky tonight. Bigger, to the leader, to come to a decade and trying to enjoy pass on the diamond. He looked up from his searching, wincing a bit as he did so. The painkiller had helped, but it didn't take everything away. Dakota folded out her wings, beating them a bit. She made the shape of the mountain with her hands and pointed back the way he thought they had come from. Well, that's good news, Tom thought. Now I just need to find my damn gun. As she approached him, she gestured to her foot and grabbed her own shoulder. He guessed she was showing him how he would have to hold on. Before she got any further, he held up a finger and drew his other revolver. He pointed at the weapon, then at the ground, and finally at his empty right leg holster. Dakota seemed nonplussed by the fact that he had lost one of his precious guns, so he pointed the remaining revolver at a tree and said, boom, mimicking the recoil motion with his arm. She tilted her head at this. She held out her hand for the revolver, quite demandingly, Tom thought. He unloaded the weapon and handed it to her. She inspected it closely before looking back at him with a quizzical look, her head tilted almost comically now. Tom wasn't really sure it was a great idea to teach them how a gun worked, but he was fairly certain it was either that or leave the wounded one behind. He walked over to where she was sitting. It wouldn't be fair to leave her out of the lesson. Dakota said something to the others, and they gathered around. She handed him back the revolver, and he began to show them how to load the weapon. With a round in the chamber, he gestured for them to plug their ears. All of them followed his lead, except for the one called Jackalope. She instead made what he guessed was a snarky remark. He couldn't understand their language, after all. He took aim at a nearby small tree and fired, the shot ringing out through the air. They all flinched, and Jackalope was suddenly clutching at her head. By his reckoning, he had just learned a few new swear words. Their ears were apparently far more sensitive than his own. It made sense. They were much larger, and their shape didn't lend itself well to being plugged. They were long, rigid, and pointy, almost like small horse ears. As he walked over to the tree, the others followed. Jackalope still yammering. They gasped when they saw the hole straight through the narrow tree trunk and the carnage done to the other side. Dakota was suddenly very keen on finding the missing revolver, ordering the others to go look for the gun. It didn't take too long to find the items. First, the knife was found and brought to Dakota, who inspected it. She ran her fingers down the jagged teeth on the backside of the blade and rubbed a bit at the powder-coated steel. She then drew her own knife. It was a long, slender blade, more like a dagger, really. It looked very finely made, with a handle that appeared to be ivory and a gem set in the pommel. She compared the 2 blades while talking with the others. Tom guessed they didn't have treated steel like this in her world. After a while, she gave Tom back his knife, just as the guard who had been watching him earlier came jogging over with the gun. She was holding the weapon very carefully, having just witnessed what it could do. As Tom took the gun, he quickly inspected it. No apparent damage. What a relief. He looked at Dakota and nodded, and she continued where she had left off with the instructions. Yes. Dakota had gone over to try and explain to their new acquaintance how to properly get on the wing when being carried. It was a maneuver they had practiced many times for just this kind of situation, but trying it with a complete newbie who couldn't even speak their tongue seemed like a recipe for disaster. They couldn't afford another downed Huntress, or they would have to walk home. When Dakota had tried to explain what he was supposed to do, he had just waved them away, apparently more concerned with the thing he had lost. She sighed. This was already a long day for her, and Dakota was right that it was getting late. If they had to stop at the cliff and teach this creature basic aerial maneuvers first, they would not be getting home today. That was when the man had come over with a shiny piece of metal in his hands. Dakota explained it was what he had used on the Vargulfs. Sapphire couldn't tell how that lump of metal was supposed to kill a Vargulf. Must be magical. Gather round, I think he's going to demonstrate, Dakota said. Sapphire craned her neck to get a better look as he started to fiddle with the thing. It was clearly more than a block of metal. It had many moving parts. He took out a metal cylinder of what looked like brass and placed it in a slot. It fit perfectly. Such craftsmanship. He then put the slot thing back to where it had started, pointed it at a tree, and motioned for them to cover their ears. She did so. The thing spat flame out the end in a quick flash. The sound was deafening this close, startling Sapphire. Jackalope had, of course, not covered her ears. "I'm not afraid of a little thunder," she had proclaimed smugly. This was immediately followed by, "What the fuck is that thing?" "Oh, wow, I can hear shit right now," Sapphire sighed again. Some people never learn. Fengi had helped her hobble over to the target tree. From the front, all you could see was a little hole. But on the back, a chunk the size of her fist was missing. That would kill almost anything, she thought. There had been room for 6 of those brass things, and he apparently had 2 of them. She gulped and made a mental note to treat Tom with more respect going forward. He had been very kind, giving her medical aid and honey, and he clearly had the capability to kill all of them. It likely wasn't out of fear that he had been kind. The Vargulf must have gotten lucky and surprised him, she remarked. The others nodded in agreement, all seeming taken aback by the weapon. Dakota quickly got them back on track, leading the others in a search for the lost items. It hadn't taken too long for them to find both another similar metal thing and what was clearly a knife made from black steel. What was it with this guy and dark colors? If he hadn't been so friendly, Sapphire might have taken him for a servant of the dark and put a shaft in him. The items were returned after a quick inspection by Dakota, who was very careful with the fire-spitting thing. Then, the instructions on how to switch carry continued. Chapter 7, Airborne. The instructions were hard to follow, with the language barrier and all, but as far as he could tell, he would need to run as fast as he could. Then one of the dragonettes would swoop down and pick him up, gain some altitude, and then place him on the back of another one. But what did that have to do with her foot? It was fascinating to look at, double-jointed with long, clawed fingers at the end. It was almost like a human foot, if it were longer and only stood on its toes. Dakota seemed to sense his confusion and called over Jackalope and Fengi, saying something before waving them off. Jackalope took to the sky with a running start, and after a short while she swooped back around. Meanwhile, Fengi had begun running with her wings tucked in, holding out her arms. It looked rather goofy, Tom thought, watching intently. Jackalope came swooping down and grabbed Fengi's arms with both her own arms and legs, pulling up and lifting them both into the air with a few strong beats of her wings. It looked easy enough, Tom thought. Dakota had then taken off, taking a running start herself. Circling around for a bit, Dakota eventually came up below Jackalope, with Fengi being lowered gently onto her back. It looked like quite a dainty operation, and Tom was starting to wonder if this was a good idea. But it made sense. He would get tired pretty fast if he had to carry someone in his arms for very long, even if they were half weight here. As Sapphire broke out into a snicker, Tom noticed he was standing mouth agape. His savior had been watching him stare at the personal airshow he was receiving, clearly finding his reaction funny. "Oh, like you didn't just stare slack-jawed at my revolver a minute ago," Tom thought, regaining his composure. As the flying trio came back down, Dakota looked expectantly at Tom. He had never been afraid of flying, but recent experiences hadn't been brilliant. He steeled himself, straightened his back, and nodded. This was his ticket, back to his carefully planned and packed supplies, and a very kind gesture too. The running part would suck though, since he'd been stabbed in the thigh recently. And how exactly were they planning on getting Sapphire airborne? Going Panas. Netherware, probably indifference of diggering of the vine message as the grating dining to the hearting. Naffering Kempati is the Vinuses. The demonstration seemed successful in getting the stranger to grasp the operation, even if he looked like he had never seen somebody fly before. Sapphire had always found it funny to see kids staring up at the fancy flying, but a fully grown being showing the same reaction was downright hilarious. Wait, was it a kid? The being turned to look at her, clearly noticing her earlier snickering, and she looked down apologetically. It didn't seem like a child. It had continued to fight all the way here, and it hadn't cried during the treatment of its wounds. It had barely whimpered, in fact. Perhaps it really had never seen someone fly before. After the demonstration, the others had come down again to prepare for departure. With the healing session, searching, demonstration, and diplomatic niceties, it was beginning to get late. They wouldn't make it much further than the cliff, so they would make camp for the night there. If their guest had camping supplies that would make things easier too, getting airborne wasn't easy when you couldn't run. She had piggybacked on Dakota, then Jackalope had swooped down to pick her up and placed her on Esmeralda's back. Their guest's ascent had been a bit more eventful, with a missed swoop by Jackalope and some difficulty getting positioned on Dakota's back. This thing just won't stay still, and be warned he's quite heavy. Jackie had warned before dropping it off. Geez, you don't say. Could you take his backpack off at least? Came the reply. Essie shaking her head as Saf snickered a bit. Esmeralda and Sapphire had continued to circle while watching. It was clear, even from this distance, the other two were struggling with their passenger, as Jackie tried to get the backpack off him mid-air. It's definitely a man, Esmeralda had suddenly said. What makes you say that? Look at him, he's oh so very uncomfortable lying on her back. Essie was good at reading people, that was for sure, and looking closely, that totally fit the bill. Normally, the boys were eager to train with the girls as soon as switch carrying was on the board. He wasn't a dragonette though, so that probably explained his reaction. Sapphire let out another little giggle as he clambered onto Dakota after losing his balance for a second. He's like a little kid. Did you see the way he was gawking when they were demonstrating? Yeah, he has no clue what is going on. Dropping R, and biggest down quantities of ice, contrate for any 100 state, and everything the air, with a matted 5 about this definitely beat his last flight. The pain and terror had been replaced with extreme awkwardness and only a slight fear of death. At least the thick leather skirt would spare him the ultimate embarrassment should the worst happen. Dakota seemed very professional about it, if a little grumpy. She struck him as the stern leader type, so that wasn't much of a surprise. Besides, to her people, this was basically just the equivalent of a fireman's carry. It had taken some time to get situated, and Jackalope had taken his backpack, though with some visible difficulty. Perhaps he was a bit on the heavy side for this. Fat ass, he cursed himself. He had gotten a little out of shape during his string of desk jobs, though he did try to keep fit at least. Once they had gotten ready, they climbed up over the canopy ever so slowly. This was Tom's first look at the horizon of this strange place. They weren't far above the treetops, but he could still see for miles around. As he scanned the horizon looking for points of interest, he couldn't see the end of the forest, but scattered around were holes in the canopy. They probably contained lakes as well as a few rocky cliffs, much like the one he had found, but they didn't seem to be heading for one. Was it beyond the horizon? How long had the chase been going on for? Perhaps he had lost track of time while paralyzed. They were definitely going slow at this time too, so it would take a while to get there. As he started to get used to the feeling of gliding while lying on top of someone, with the occasional wing beat keeping them aloft, he began to wonder, how fast were they going? He honestly could not tell, though judging by the wind, it was perhaps 60 or 70 km fast enough for him to pull down his goggles. The chase through the woods had felt more like motorway speeds. That was probably close to full speed for them, he thought. After a little over half an hour, Dakota shouted out to the others. She was breathing quite heavily now, and her wing beats were getting slower. Jackalope and Fengi came over, and Fengi grabbed Tom, placing him on Jackalope's back. After catching her breath for a bit, Dakota proceeded to move Sapphire to Fengi. The aerial switcheroo seemed like an efficient way of solving the problem of endurance, Tom thought. Even so, the discomfort had now returned. Jackalope wasn't quite as professional with her cargo. Shortly after taking possession of him, she decided to test if Tom was scared of flying and started performing acrobatics. As she began rolling around and making small dives, Tom wrapped his arms around her chest and tried to hold on with his legs. For once, he had had enough excitement for one day, but she clearly hadn't. Jackalope, in fact, seemed very pleased, giggling like a schoolgirl at her passenger's terror. Tom resigned himself to avoiding encouraging her by relaxing as much as he could, but that only led to more violent maneuvers as she clearly tried to scare him again. After a few minutes of fun, Dakota had come over and given her what sounded like a few stern words. Sapphire had chimed in too, though she sounded more encouraging to Tom's ears. If you find a night people had gone over to Discota, is to Discota on the speak with a how we had a best oblong. You're wasting wing beats. Dakota had gone over to put an end to Jackalope's little game. Let her have some fun. We're almost there anyway. Sapphire had joined in. Well, her passenger doesn't seem to be having fun. In fact, it looks quite painful for him, Dakota had retorted. Okay, it'll stop, geez. Jackalope didn't seem pleased about her fun being taken away. But the guy hadn't had a great day this far, and if Sapphire was right, this might be his first time flying without being in something's claws, so perhaps they should go easy on him for now. It didn't take too long before the cliff was in sight. They would camp for the night and set out again tomorrow. They would be making the journey in several hops. With only 2 flyers per load, they couldn't stay on the wing for that long and would have to take rests. As they approached the cliff and made ready to land, their passenger had started acting up. I think he wants to go to the bottom, Jackalope had shouted out. Fine, well, swoop down and see if there is anything there, Dakota had agreed after Tom's continued to point down. As they came down, there was something weird looking down there, besides the rope which had been secured at various points going up the cliff. Landing was a lot easier. You just flew down close to the ground, low and slowly pulled up to a vertical position. The fly would hit the ground running, with the passenger going for a piggyback ride. Fengi and Sapphire pulled it off perfectly. The young fly was a natural, after all. Tom and Jackalope got down just fine, though Tom made some weird noises. Perhaps Jackie had dived in a bit steeply, likely getting payback for her lost fun from earlier, and the loop certainly wasn't necessary. After Jackalope had come running to a stop, it took a while for Tom to realize they had stopped and get off, leading to much laughter and giggling from the others. They had quieted down quickly, though, as Tom had run over to the thing. It was some kind of weird cart. Well, it definitely had wheels. 6 of them, in fact. How would such a thing steer? And there was nothing to pull it either. Was it magical too? Or had the draft animal simply run away? What is that? Jackalope had questioned, looking more perplexed than ever. No clue, Esmeralda answered. Well, he was certainly right about having more stuff, Fengi pointed out. Their passenger, chest assessed. He gleefully ran over to the strange cart and hugged it, seeming extremely pleased that he had made it back. He began pulling out different things, most of which Sapphire didn't recognize. Some were clearly boxes with meat in them. Well, if he was sharing, they would at least eat decently tonight. Then he simply started handing things out to them. Well, guess that question is answered, Sapphire mused, happy at the thought of a warm meal tonight. As he continued to rummage through his stuff, he brought out a silk bag in the same green and black pattern he was wearing. He sat down and put his hand over his head. Thank the gods he has a tent. It's not going to be cursed, right? It has black on it, Essie questioned, sounding slightly weary. Nothing bad has happened yet, but feel free to sleep in the cold, Jackie countered as she fiddled with one for the see-through meat boxes. The briding in everywhere, chiming the one-pages with the responsible, the justing equid stop, and everyone. Oh, there is a god, he thought, as he hugged his precious little quad bike. This meant food and shelter too, which was nice since the dragonette seemed to have neither apart from some snacks. Perhaps they hadn't been planning on sleeping out. That would mean their home was less than a day away, at least by flight. He got out some fresh clothes and used some of the water from the little barrel to finally get cleaned up somewhat. They at least had the decency to pretend to look away while he changed, even if he was certain they were trying to catch a glance out of the corners of their eyes. Well, he was probably as alien to them as they were to him, if not more. He wondered if they had stories about humans here, just like there were stories of dragons back home. After he had begun handing out the funny clear containers with the deer which, to Sapphire's nose, had probably been killed only yesterday, the tent he had brought along came out, along with a bunch of other equipment. Dakota got the gist and started ordering the others about. Sapphire was taken up to the top of the cliff. It seemed they still wanted to sleep up there. Well, there wasn't much he could do to stop them. Besides, they knew more about this place than he did, so there was probably a good reason. It was a little difficult setting the tent up on the cliff top with no dirt, but he had managed it with a little help and some big rocks. It would be a bit cramped with 6 people in it, but not too bad. Everything he had taken out was meticulously inspected after he was done using it. The tent and food boxes seemed especially interesting. They had probably never seen plastic or nylon, and yet they could still relate to it, at least somewhat. It wasn't like the solar charges, which only got a quick glance. His fire steel had caused quite a stir too, after wood for the fire had been brought by Fengi. He eventually had to confiscate the steel from Jackalope. After she kept making sparks with it, he couldn't have her wearing it out already. The meal he made had gone over very well too, it seemed. He had taken the opportunity to test some of his different spices on them. Chili hadn't been a hit, but almost everything else had gone over well. When he'd brought out a box of hard candy for dessert, he honestly thought they were going to eat his hand. He had hastily given them another when they were finished with the first. Sweet tooth well and truly confirmed. But also, you can just see her. The challenges were the safer of Ace's easy tan. When Tom started pulling out boxes and bags of supplies, it became clear he was prepared to camp out for quite a while. He had freshly killed meat, some sort of magic fire starter, a tent made of silk, spices of many kinds, and the best thing Sapphire had ever tasted. He had called them candy. It was like a hard, solid chunk of pure sweetness, and fruity too. Apparently, you just sucked on it rather than crushing it, probably to make it last longer. Even Jackalope did as she was told and didn't break it. It had been heaven, and he had given them 2 each. Just how rich was this guy? When it had been time for bed, he had given her a kind of sleeping bag. It was made out of the same dark green and black silk as the tent. This pattern must mean something. It was on nearly everything here. She had gotten into it very carefully, so as not to scratch it with her claws. It was so warm and comfortable, she felt as if she were sleeping in the middle of a summer day. As she curled up inside, sleep came quickly. She had been excused from guard duty due to her injuries, and Dakota had thought it more than fair that Tom, being their host of sorts and being injured too, was also excused. Not that they knew how to tell him to pull guard duty anyway. The next morning, Sapphire was up first. The nice sleeping bag had warmed her up much faster than the others lying around the tent. But Tom was already up, it seemed. She couldn't get out without help, so she just lay there thinking for a while. How had he gotten here? And how was he so well prepared and seemingly rich, yet appeared to have no clue what he was doing? It was a very contradictory conundrum. When Esmeralda had finally started to stir, she jumped at the chance to get some fresh air. It was nice and warm in the tent, but it wasn't very large, and the air was getting quite stale. "Hey, you up yet, Essie?" "Yeah, I guess so." "What is it? Think you can help me get out of this thing?" "Sure, hang on." Esmeralda was clearly still not quite up to temperature yet, but she got up and helped Sapphire out of the delicate prison cell. With her friend's help, she hobbled outside. It was a cool morning outside, and the sun was barely up yet. She almost wanted to go back in the warm tent, to be honest. Tom was sitting on a rock, writing in a book, it seemed, perhaps taking notes on what was going on. "Morning," she tried. He looked up, seemingly not having noticed them come out. "God, Morgan," he answered. "What a weird language." She guessed he had returned the gesture, or perhaps asked how she was doing. She couldn't tell, but he seemed happy enough when she and Esmeralda had walked over to the fire and sat down. Saf winced. The pain was even worse today when she moved. It was getting unbearable, in fact. He seemed to notice and came over with another of the small beads he had given her yesterday and the water bottle. Maybe it was for the pain? That would make sense. It hadn't hurt this bad yesterday. She took the bead, but politely drank from her own water skin instead. She didn't need to take everything he had after all. After that, he had shown her the book he was writing in. It seemed he was making some sort of map. It was the saddest map she had ever seen, but definitely a map. It had 4 locations scribbled on it, with lines going between them in a weird script, and one seemed to be the cliff. "This guy is a moron, Essie. What did he do now? Yasta prose and boards, and now extend and hundred falsements, and prosed cake treeing, John Bright." The same couldn't be said for his traveling companions, though. Every last one of them had slept in. When he got up, he relieved Fengi as the guard and sat down, staring out over the horizon, wondering just what he had gotten himself into. At least things seemed to be improving. If he was correct, they were bringing him to their home. For what reason, he did not know, though he hoped he had made a good enough impression that it wouldn't be for some nefarious purpose. Besides, they seemed friendly enough, even jovial, at least some of them. He wouldn't mind staying with them for a while if he could. He had no doubt they would be exciting for quite a while. What kind of culture and architecture would people who can fly come up with? How technologically advanced were they? And what about magic? They clearly had some, but what could it do? Furthermore, it was hilarious to see how they reacted to some of the things he had brought with him. If there were more people like them where they were going, he could keep getting those reactions for some time to come. He chuckled at the idea of showing them their first movie. That was going to be glorious. He had gotten out his map book to note down what he could see from here to the best of his ability. He didn't notice when the dragonet started stirring. Melnakit came from Sapphire, who had apparently woken up along with Esmeralda. "Good morning," he retorted, assuming that was what she had said. As they walked over, it was clear Sapphire was in quite a bit of pain. He pulled the painkillers from his pocket and handed her one, cursing himself. He had taken 3 already, yet he'd forgotten to give her any. Not cool. After that, he showed her his map to see if she could perhaps show where they were going. She turned her head and went Numenosta Uev Malai, sounding as if she had just lost all hope for him. Esmeralda had answered, Svabel Tirajachi Tiraka. She sounded a little perturbed. Tom would need to start practicing those sounds, he thought to himself. He wondered if he could even produce them without wrecking his throat. Now was not the time, though. Tom knew his map wasn't great, but this seemed a little extreme. He held out his compass to see if they knew what it was. No luck, apparently. Well, shit. He had resorted to just pointing in various directions, hoping they would catch the meaning. After tilting her head a bit, Esmeralda pointed nearly due west, according to the current north at least. That was something, at least. The others had slowly joined the world of the waking. As the sun rose in the sky, Tom had made a quick breakfast, and they packed up the camp in no time. Soon after, Tom was grabbed by the shoulders and flown back down again. He could get used to this kind of VIP treatment. It would have been quite a climb otherwise, if he could have gotten away with doing it without getting pounced on. Again, of course. As he was packing the quad bike, Fengi had even been kind enough to take down his rope for him, even if it was returned in 2 pieces. The dragonets had gathered around as he finished packing, seemingly waiting in anticipation to see how the machine was supposed to move. This was exactly the kind of moment he had been waiting for. He made a space on top of the big watertight chest, putting down his roll-out mattress there, and gestured for Sapphire to lay down. She seemed suspicious, but she got on eventually. Then Tom got on the quad bike and turned the key, reputing, "This is Ina's and Neversific compasses, with a sister Vaborying and Intenu, with a very good breakfast done and the camp packed up." They all gathered around the strange cart on the ground. Tom had prepared a place for Sapphire to lie down. She reluctantly got onto the cart and waited. Tom mounted the smaller front section of the vehicle. It was clearly some kind of seat with bars to hang on to. Then, the thing started purring loudly, or perhaps it was a snarl, she wasn't quite sure. The others took a step back, and then it started to move on its own. Tom made a short lap around, showing off it seemed. He even straightened out for a short bit, and the thing accelerated as the snarling grew louder, before coming back around, stopping in front of the others. They all stood there awestruck, looking at it. This was the largest magical thing any of them had ever seen. Only stories of legend told of enchanted items of this size. No wonder he had been happy to see it again. She recovered from the shock primarily by watching all the dumb faces her friends were making, not to mention Tom laughing his ass off at their expense this time. She smirked at them from her little throne, grinning from ear to ear at their reactions. "Seems there will be no need to switch carry today. It's fine to E, to the managing pointing and D. Sure, it was noisy and a bit bumpy at times, but she was moving without doing a thing. It wasn't that fast, though it seemed like that was mostly the terrain's fault. Whenever Tom found a smooth bit, he would speed up a little. Perhaps he was just worried she would fall off. The others had seemed pretty jealous that she got to ride the magic cart, but it had given them the opportunity to actually do some hunting, which was why they had come out here after all. Esmeralda had stayed, however, just in case something happened. Besides, they needed a flyer to navigate. Fengi needed the practice, and Dakota wouldn't let Jackalope near Tom's things without supervision. Jackalope tended to be quite hands-on, and that could be a problem when you didn't know what anything did. Esmeralda had found her place sitting behind Tom on the front part of the cart with her arms around him. Saf was sure she was enjoying her turn, making the poor guy uncomfortable. She even rested her head on his shoulders and giggled when they went over bumps. It was definitely working too. Look, Saf. He is almost as red as Shiva's furnace now. Esmeralda was indeed enjoying herself, Sapphire concluded. Doesn't that mean rage in soft-skinned species? I think it's embarrassment for this one. Esmeralda giggled as they went up a small berm. Don't wear him out just yet. He is being extremely kind after all. Yeah, I know, it's just so funny. Besides, what else am I supposed to do? This isn't going very fast. We might not even make it back today. You could sing us a song? The first time, exactly, having recently won under Cygnus, and they can propped the high sick company, which pushing Keat 5 as they drove through the woods. Tom thought to himself that this wasn't as bad as yesterday. He had had girls on the back of a bike before, but personal space didn't seem to be a concept the Dragonette shared. Judging by their collective giggling, they were trying their best to torture him. Brilliant. After a while, she began singing. It was a dainty tune, seeming quite happy and idyllic. Her vocal range was impressive too. She could definitely sing. However, when she switched to a deeper tone, it caught him off guard a few times. Sapphire wasn't singing along, just humming a bit, so he guessed Esmeralda was the designated musician of the group. I wonder what kind of musical instruments they have, he thought. He had only brought his father's harmonica. He couldn't really play anything else, so anything larger would have just been dead weight. His father had taught him a few tunes on it, but it wasn't like he could play while driving. He knew plenty of songs, even if he was a terrible singer. But that was why he had brought speakers. When she finished one of the little songs, he decided to try out I Can See Clearly Now. This got another reaction from Sapphire, and stunned silence from Esmeralda, who was clearly trying to work out what was happening. After a while, she started joining in a little on the chorus. It sure helped the time pass, and by the time he got to Walking on Sunshine, even Sapphire gave it a go. He noticed they couldn't quite hit the nuances of English. Their mouths weren't really made for it, he thought, and the resulting accent was hilarious. Every once in a while, Esmeralda would go up to get her bearings and guide Tom where he needed to go. So far, it had gone swimmingly. Around lunchtime, she came down with the others in tow. Watching as Tom put on Walking on Sunshine again, Dakota just stood there staring. Jackalope broke out laughing, and Fengi started dancing, with Sapphire and Esmeralda trying their damnedest to sing the chorus. Tom had a mini breakdown at the scene in front of him, joining Jackalope in laughing his ass off. They had made a quick camp and prepared the leftovers this morning. Their appetites weren't quite as bad this time around. Perhaps they weren't used to 3 meals a day. Well, that might suck in the long run, he thought. They had made quite the dent in the deer he had shot, though. In turn, they had brought back some fresh kills. Another deer, a few of the jackalope things, and a large green and red bird that looked a bit like a goose. Tom had helped load all the meat onto the quad bike, with the deer on the front cargo rack and Sapphire surrounded by smaller animals. She looked like a prized trophy on display. Space was becoming a premium, even if the suspension wasn't having any trouble on account of the gravity here. There wasn't much more room. They had continued on for an hour or two before reaching the edge of the forest. It had just ended, like poof, no more trees. The woods gave way to open plains and rolling hills, mostly grassland. Well, at least he could navigate this terrain much easier, not to mention go faster. It was clear to him from the grumbling sounds Dakota had made at lunch that she wasn't entirely happy with the progress made so far. If you're ready together, they are open to them buying, because the individuals, the any abartality. This is the any together. Apparently, Esmeralda's singing had given Tom an idea. After she finished a song, he stopped and pulled a metal box-like object from the big chest she was lying on. After he fiddled with it for a while, it started playing music. There were instruments, singers, and everything else imaginable coming out of the little box. Sapphire was honestly starting to wonder if there was any limit to what Tom had with him. What else was hiding in the chest she was currently lying on? The music was fun and happy, much like Esmeralda's songs. After a while, she'd even joined in. Thanks to Tom, she wasn't the worst singer present for once. The face on the others, when they had returned to a moving musical orchestra in the middle of the forest, was worth singing for, even if she had tried and failed to keep a straight face and sing at the same time. Tom had then gotten out the food again and dug in, seeming just as hungry as usual. Maybe it was because he was wounded. He didn't look like a glutton, so that must be it. The others had gone out to hunt again, hoping to catch a bit more small game on the way home. So it was just them, and Tom had put the music back on again. Even if it was slow, she could get used to this. They had finally made it out of the forest shortly after the food stop, and with fresh meat on board. Even if they would be a day late, at least they would be bringing food home as promised, and a new friend. Her suspicions about the cart had been proven correct. When Tom had gotten out onto the grassy plains, he had sped up to near flying speed. This was slow for flying, but still, it was quite thrilling doing this speed on the ground. She had always enjoyed going low and fast, but this was different. It had also gotten a lot bumpier, and she winced every once in a while when they hit a bad bump. "Woohoo, now we are moving," Esmeralda had cried out. They were moving fast for just under an hour before the keep had come into view ahead of them. They had pulled to a stop to wait for the others. After a short while, Sapphire had spotted them heading for them from behind. Tom had gotten off taking another weird thing with him. They had let him go about his thing and turned to welcome the others back. "So, where have you been?" "We've been waiting for you," Sapphire said, grinning from ear to ear. "Oh, cut the crap, will you? Why weren't you going this fast before?" Dakota had answered. Clearly, not pleased, the ground-bound cart had outdistanced her. Terrain, Esmeralda had added informatively. "As soon as we got out of the forest, he sped up. I think it might be able to go even faster. The front part is pulling the rear, and I think he is worried I might fall off, too." "Are you suggesting this thing is as fast as flying?" Dakota tried sounding stoic, but there was a hint of incredulous in her voice if you knew where to look for it. "Also, what is he doing now, looking at the keep with a kind of telescope?" "I think Esmeralda on point as usual. As usual, 1 point as usual, in the open." But for the time being, Tom was occupied. This was the first building he had seen here, and it was dead ahead, so chances were good it was the destination. He had brought out the binoculars to get a closer look. It was a tall stone construction, seemingly built into the top of a rocky outcropping. It looked like a stone keep, with tall towers. It was quite big, certainly bigger than what 5 hunters needed. It looked very defensible too, being on top of a big rock and all. Although he wasn't sure how important that would be if the enemy could fly too. The dragonettes had been discussing something quite heatedly, he thought. Jackalope especially had seemed almost hyper. She'd been pointing at the quad bike too. Did she want to ride along for a while? He couldn't see a problem with that. Then Dakota had come over and started doing hand gestures. Someone had protecting to each of the brig, which was an tenuous doctor, had just unnessing to D. He seemed to get the message Dakota was trying to convey pretty quickly once he gave up. He at least started smiling and nodding. Perhaps he was just as much of a speed freak as Jackalope. The rules were simple to keep it fair for Tom. A simple race from one point to another, with Fengi acting as the starter and the others as the finish line. Tom had unhooked the rear part of the cart and removed some of the cargo from the front part and left it with the others. He, Fengi, and Jackalope had then gone a fair distance away. Fengi had ridden along on the back with Tom, wanting to try too. With the racers in position, Fengi had given the signal and they were off. Tom took an early lead with Jackalope beating hard to get into the air and up to speed. It was clear that the weird cart could accelerate fast from a standstill. She could hear it even at this distance. The tone was higher too. Divined, summoning pasting and pint, and suspended to go after some minute Shane. He would struggle to do 100 kilometers on this terrain, even if it was very nice, flat grass. This was a utility ATV after all, not a racer. But so far, he was winning. And by quite a bit. Unfortunately, it was a race to the finish line, rather than having to stop at the finish line, he thought. Surely he must have the advantage in brakes too. As Tom looked back, he saw Jackalope had gotten going surprisingly quickly and was bearing down on him. She wasn't more than 2 or 3 meters above the ground, and looked like an eagle hunting a mouse, eyes looking at him. Those green eyes. Oh, she was a predator all right. "Well, that's bloody unnerving," he said to himself, hunkering down to try and get what speed he could. 90 kf, 95. He wasn't going to get much more out of this thing. And if he was right, the dragonettes did 100 easy. He was more than halfway through, and he still had a lead on her. It wasn't enough, though. There had been less than 50 meters left when Jackalope had made it past him, going at quite the pace, and she seemed to still be accelerating too, and doing well in excess of 100 at this point. Well, damn it, that was great fun though. Oh, in the mites, some of the 6 with a halfer of a 1950 brake running, and pour the halfer of a Nisset to mission with a stead. Chap kick. Running. Mike racing. Offel of an if racing a valuable quad bike running on limited fuel wasn't the best idea. Tom had never raced something that flew before, let alone a person going under their own power. Jackalope had taken the victory most graciously, meaning she had launched into a series of celebratory acrobatics and came down looking like a football fan whose team had just scored. She had started shouting what Tom believed were obscenities and gloating. Well deserved, Tom thought to himself. He would be over the moon too if he had just outrun a quad bike on foot. And he couldn't stop himself from getting carried away in her celebrations, sitting on his bike, laughing his ass off. Despite losing, he still felt like a winner. It had been a close race, much closer than any of them had anticipated. How something on the ground could move like that and still be able to pull such a heavy trailer was astounding. It was like it was half oxen and half deer. Jackalope had done it though, and was celebrating in the usual fashion. She could pull off quite the maneuvers this time around. Nothing like what Sapphire could do, of course. Sapphire was the finest flyer on the whole damned island. Well, she had been. She felt a little disheartened as she remembered she would not be up there on her own wings for weeks. When Jackalope finally sat down, she walked around strutting like she owned the place. So, who is still the fastest thing around? Oh yes, I am, the celebratory dance seemingly was too much for Tom as he broke out laughing. He seemingly hadn't taken the loss too badly. Then he set off again. Apparently he thought he should try and copy Jackalope. They all turned to look, and even Jackalope fell silent, if only for a little bit. What is he doing? Jackalope's question was met with quite a few tilted heads. Is he trying to dance with it? Fengi had questioned. I think he is trying to copy you, Jacko Dakota said cheerily. Sapphire sat on her perch, head tilted. The magic cart couldn't just go fast. It could do acrobatics on the ground, too. Groundabatics? No, that sounded stupid. Fengi was right, it was dancing. Yes, he was dancing with it, spinning it around, kicking up dirt, and making a lot of noise. It was clear that the movement came from the wheels turning, not some kind of force pushing it along. Tom even got the thing up onto two wheels, both the back ones and the side. It looked both brutish and graceful at the same time. It was clearly a kind of celebration, like the one Jackalope had performed. When he returned, he seemed extremely pleased with himself, letting out a hue of weird words, probably still trying to copy Jackalope. He had gotten off and walked over to Jackalope and given her his hand to shake and patted her on the shoulder. She had shaken his hand, then picked him up and ruffled his hair. Oh, so you think you can show off when I win, huh? This prompted a little yelp from Tom, his gut clearly not enjoying the treatment. Jackalope quickly put him back down again. Sorry, she said sheepishly, before going back to ruffle his hair. Oh my gods, it's so soft. Tom seemed to take it in. Good spirits, taking a deep breath and straightening up again, the smile returning to his face as Fengi came over to touch too, but it's so thin and airy. After her little celebration, Jackalope had clearly decided she had a new friend. She picked him up in a hug and gave him a noogie. However, his gut protested loudly at the squeeze, as it was already quite sore from the racing and showing off. She put him down quickly when he let out a little yelp, offering what sounded like an apology. Almost immediately, she went back to touching his hair. It was apparently very interesting to her. Since her kind didn't have hair, that made sense. Come to think of it, if he was the only human here, what kind of animals had hair like humans? Horses and maybe some apes? Fengi too had come over to touch, and Esmeralda had followed close behind. This was weird. He felt like a dog being petted. At least Dakota had held her curiosity at bay, and Sapphire, well, she couldn't walk by herself. The little exchange had been brought to an end when Dakota said something. The others had seemingly agreed and begun taking to the sky. Tom guessed it was time to get moving again. I'll galope with him. That I want to ride on the cart this time. Would you stop fiddling with him? We should get moving now that you had your little race. Yeah, but I want to ride on the cart this time. Jackalope was already getting on, prompting Tom to hastily make his way over, probably scared she would set off without him. A valid point, Sapphire thought. Dakota and Esmeralda had helped hook up the rear part of the cart again. They hadn't been going for long before Jackalope decided this was not as much fun as she had hoped. They weren't going nearly as fast as during the race. So she set about making her own fun, because of course she had to. Sapphire sighed as Jackalope began experimenting with folding out her wings, feeling the air flowing over them. Tom had seemed alarmed at first, but then he started smiling. He was apparently familiar with the concept of rapid boredom. He pointed to the piece of rope Fengi had taken down earlier, and then to some metal pipe on the back end of the front cart. Jackalope figured out the meaning before Sapphire and quickly snatched the rope. Sapphire tried to intervene, but she was too slow. This wasn't going to end well, she was sure of it. With the rope tied in place, Jackalope had folded out her wings and taken to the air while they were moving with a single wing beat. She was holding on to the other end of the rope and was now flying like a kite. "This is bloody brilliant," had come down from the now airborne Jackalope as she began letting out rope climbing higher. "What are you doing?" Dakota had come over, demanding. "Gliding isn't that obvious. No need to do anything, I can just hang here forever." "That is actually kind of smart." Dakota had to admit. "I want to try," Fengi had piped up, already grabbing on. Further down the rope, "This is nice," Esmeralda added, quick to join the flying circus they had become. One ostentities, dragging along after him. Sapphire had just shaken her head at the display. She didn't seem pleased. Perhaps she was jealous? Well, it was probably annoying to see her friend having fun where she couldn't. That is when a gust of wind hit from the left. So, with the rear of his quad bike now being lifted into the air by 4 dragonets that hadn't sensed the need to let go, Tom wondered if perhaps this was what Sapphire had been thinking about. With the wind blowing them to the right, they lifted the rear wheels clean off the ground and jackknifed the quad and the trailer, causing it to roll over. Well, shit. Sapphire shouted at the others, now in considerable pain, having landed on her broken wing. At least she hadn't got caught underneath. Tom had jumped off and landed in a roll almost as if by instinct. It looked like this wasn't the first time he had tried something like this. "Whoops," was all Jackalope had gotten out. "Sorry," Fengi had followed up sheepishly, with Esmeralda and Dakota diving down to help. "Anyone hurt?" Dakota had questioned. "Clearly worried, landed on my damn wing again," but otherwise, no. Sapphire had answers, biting in the pain. Tom had quickly gotten back to the cart, and had stopped the noise it was making, and had then gone over to Sapphire to try and help. He had gotten her back up and sat her down. Her wing would need to be reset, but the leg splint had held. Well, it was a good idea, Jackalope had said, clearly trying to defend her actions. But badly executed, Dakota had snarled back. What if she had gotten caught underneath? "Well, how was I supposed to know we could lift that thing? It looks so heavy." "Yeah, but you were for pulling," Sapphire interjected. Tom had given her another of the strange beads. She graciously accepted. They seemed to work wonders for the pain. Jackalope and Fengi helped Tom get the cart back on its wheels. It seemed undamaged by the tumble, and the cargo was mostly where it should be. "Hey, at least this thing is tougher than you are," Jackalope had let out, seeming to realize her mistake as she turned to look at Sapphire. Sitting on the ground glaring at her, with the kind of look reserved for people who just never seem to know when to shut the fuck up. Sorry, Saph," she let out sheepishly. After the accident, Jackalope had been banned from further experimentation and would be flying for the rest of the way. Jackalope didn't seem to think this was fair, but Fengi and Esmeralda weren't about to start an argument with a furious Sapphire, and Dakota seemed to be on her side, too. Besides, they were being let off the hook easy, so might as well not draw any unwanted attention. With Sapphire back on the cart, they had continued the journey home, and, with the speed they were setting, it wouldn't be long. They could already see the keep clearly, in the distance. Awed, firsting the seas, it is everest dedicated practice. Alongside what appeared to be approaching the keep, Tom started to make out a few small buildings around the base of the cliff, alongside what appeared to be animal pens and fields. The buildings looked like stables or storage houses to him, so the people probably all lived in the keep. As they got closer, a horn sounded. Dakota had gone on ahead, while Fengi came down, indicating for Tom to stop. Dakota returned with 2 others, both clad in armor seemingly more suited to actual battle than what the girls he knew were wearing. It at least covered most of their bodies, even if Tom would still describe it as light, mostly cloth and leather with a few reinforcing plates here and there. It wasn't nearly as ornate either. They had landed and inspected him, walking around while the others talked. They didn't seem openly hostile, but they were definitely on edge, all this most likely being a bit much to take in. After a few prods with the blunt end of a spear and a raised tone from Dakota, they had flown back up to the keep. So this place has guards, seemingly at least a few people, and judging by the farming, it's not a temporary residence either. Not a bad place to start, he thought to himself. The 4 remaining dragonets had stayed with him as he drove down a small road between the fields and a small lake. Fengi jumped on the back again and rode along. There were 4 people Tom could count tending to the crops and animals, with a few children running around as well. Of course, everyone stopped to look at the weird thing coming through. Sapphire let out some embarrassing-sounding noises and tried to hide behind her good wing. One of the farmhands, clearly an older male, had a bit of a laugh at her expense, seeming not to be worried by the stranger passing by. Fengi and Sapphire chatted for a bit, and Sapphire finally came out of hiding again. As Tom pulled up at the base of the big cliff that apparently serves as the foundation for the keep, he looked up in awe. It was as tall as a damned cathedral. Even if the cliff added a few dozen meters, the structure was still near 80 meters tall on its own. Low gravity and flying workers clearly made going tall easier, he guessed, imagining the endless flights of stairs going up. It would be a lot of trips if he didn't want to leave everything down here. Being flightless suddenly sucked a lot more than he had thought it would. They were a day late, had Avalathan and Unkai, with the magic and neediest 1940s, daying out Distan. They were a day late, had given them some grief upon their return. They were a day late, had a wounded and some weird stranger with them. After some protest, Dakota had simply told them to go get anyone important and be done with it. It was not their place to refuse her, so they had snapped to it. As they approached, everyone had stopped to look at them. Sapphire wasn't normally opposed to being the center of attention, but being carried home with a broken wing wasn't something she wanted to be known for. And she felt weird, sluggish, she thought. She had tried to pinch her arm and hadn't felt a thing. Damn, this stuff is strong, she had said. What is? Fengi had questioned, turning around on the seat to face her. This medicine Tom has given me. I can feel a thing. Sure, that is safe. Well, he is taking it too. Just don't let me fall asleep. Okay. Okay. Fengi answered, clearly not comfortable with the situation. Raoulf had greeted them as soon as they were within earshot. Oh, hi, welcome back. The hunt went well, I see. The old man clearly amused. There would be stories about this in the future, she thought to herself, not sure what to do about it. For the time being, she would concede to hide in shame. Oh, come now, Saf, it's not that bad. You will be flying again in no time. Fengi tried cheering her up. I know, but this is still embarrassing and I feel sick. Oh, now you're just being facetious. You are riding home on a magical cart sitting on a treasure trove of who knows what. How can that be embarrassing? Sapphire conceded the point and came out of hiding, even as she wasn't pleased with the situation. The rocking motion of the cart didn't help how she was feeling either. They had pulled up the foot of the keep. Tom was sitting on the cart, staring at the keep. Fengi had helped her off. As Dakota came back down with Balethon and Unkai, they want to see our guests right away. Also, they are not pleased with making them worry about us. Well, what should we have done? We couldn't spare someone to go tell them now, could we? What if we needed to get everyone airborne? Fengi objected, trying to ready her defense in case what Dakota said was true. I take no responsibility for what happened, Jackalope had been quick to add. I know you don't. You never do. Dakota seemed consigned to her fate of having to endure this on herself. Old, reliable Jackalope sounded almost proud of the statement. Ugh, why do I have to deal with you? Oh, you love me and you know it. Right, Dakota snapped. Let's get everyone up to the greeting hall. You two guard this cart. Nobody touches anything on it. It isn't ours, and it might be capable of killing us all. The 2 guards stiffened, nodded, and looked perturbed at the weird cart. Should we put it further away, ma'am? You shall not touch it, am I clear? Crystal clear, ma'am, satisfied her orders were in fact going to get carried out. Dakota took to the sky. Well, follow on then. You get the heavy one, Jacko, since I love you so much. Oh, come on. Oh, fair 1,000 porters and pieces, and a language starts and caffeting off, with course of the few undiviners, and his stares to the fist enemy to Dada and the 2 guards had returned. Words were exchanged, and from what he could gather, Dakota seemed to have some authority here. That would make things easier, he thought. Jackalope snapped her fingers in front of him and started making hand gestures too fast to follow, beating her wings. Oh, right, up. Tom nodded and Jackalope took to the sky, swooping back around. He ran like hell, and soon he was airborne again. At least this means I don't have to take the stairs this time, he thought. My thigh still hurts like hell from running like that. He took the opportunity to look out over the keep's grounds. There wasn't much to see apart from the field, a small lake, and some pens. It was quite idyllic, though. He had been put down on an open platform, kinda like a helipad if a bit rectangular, that stuck out from the side of the keep. It had a big wooden door with metal bracing that opened upwards, currently open into an internal area about the size of the pad itself. Sweet, a hangar, he thought to himself. It was empty though, and what would they need a hangar for in the first place? There was a welcome party waiting for them. A few more guards, 2 important-looking people in the middle, and a few others around, including a few more children. The 2 in the middle looked like a male and a female, and seemed quite old, both being nearly completely silver in color. 2 of the guards looked a bit more important too. He looks weird. Where did you say you found him? In the claws of a small pack of vargulfs, Mom. Dakota answered promptly, back straight, looking ahead. Oh, and dear Sapphire, you got yourself quite hurt this time. Did you hit a tree or something? No, ma'am. Our guest was thrown at me mid-air, Sapphire said. She was getting worse. Her head was spinning hard now. I think I need to go lay down. I don't feel well. Huh, that's a new one. Quickly now, get inside. I shall be with you shortly. Fengi, help her out, will you? As the 2 hobbled off, Nunuk turned her attention back to the new guest. Sue, you aren't from around here, are you? He can't understand you, Mum, Dakota interjected. Is that Sue? Well, in that case, we might as well bring him inside. Apuma, we have need of your skills. Ratchuk, if you wouldn't mind escorting them. Right then, you go and see to Sapphire. I shall prepare for this one, Apuma answered, turning to leave, gesturing for Tom to follow. Our guest took a wound to the gut. He will need attention too, I think, Dakota interjected. Well, I need some time to prepare anyway. I promise not to make a mess. In the meantime, you should take a look at our guest. Then Apuma sounded playful as always, even in his old age. You better not, or you are sleeping on the floor tonight. I'll take a look at our guest too. If he was wounded like that though, perhaps we should let him rest for the night too. His name is Tom, and I think he would appreciate a bit of rest, Dakota said, almost sounding apologetic that she had failed to mention the information. I see. You look like you have been through it too. Go get some rest. I guess we will hold on till tomorrow, the old woman said, turning to lead the way and sighed. As Sapphire was taken to the infirmary, she sighed, a sigh of relief. She was home safe, if not entirely sound, but her wing and leg would get tended to properly. Nunuk had started by checking everything had been seated properly. All was going to be fine, if a little boring. Being grounded was no fun. You couldn't do much, except get in the way. And Oxo, his breezy passage, the ranks of the race, months also chemistry, to scriptures perfecting the carriage. May fact, pre-H. Sapphire had been placed in the bed next to him, so he guessed it was an infirmary of sorts. Okay, that was good. After a short while, the old lady returned with 2 assistants and what appeared to be herbal supplies. Tom thought to himself that perhaps he really should have brought the medical kit up with him. Was he at a witch doctor's or something? She had started on Sapphire. Well, at least that gave him an opportunity to watch first. It seemed the old woman was primarily checking that everything was as it should be. She had started glowing faintly with the same light that had emanated from Dakota's hand when she closed his wounds. Maybe she was sensing if something was wrong. That sounded handy. When she had finished with Sapphire, she let her 2 assistants apply herbs along the scarring left by the wound closing, combined with bandages and fresh splints to keep everything in place. Okay, so it definitely wasn't a one and done kind of thing. A shame, because that would have been awesome. It was more like magical surgery, he guessed. She moved over to Tom and started the same procedure, asking Sapphire a few questions while she worked. She seemed to be concentrating a great deal. It took quite a lot longer than it had with Sapphire. Perhaps working on someone of a different species didn't help. Her brow furrowed more than once, and Tom desperately hoped it was out of concentration rather than worry. A worried doctor was never a good sign. When the procedure was complete, he too was bandaged where the wounds were, even if they looked more like scars at this point. Must be something to help speed the process. Hell, it might even be magic, Tom thought, inspecting his injuries. Afterward, the lady talked with Sapphire for a while, then made some gestures toward Tom and the bed, accompanied by a raised finger. He guessed he was supposed to stay in bed. He could do that for a while. As they arrived, where it begin other side of. They are brobber, single. As there is a problem indicating today by the left from a finger wards and assured her soons. Munich had seen to Sapphire's wounds and assured her she was going to be fine, though she warned her against accepting more of Tom's medicine. Potent. The bone would take a while to heal, but with crutches and a better splint, she would be walking tomorrow. Tom, however, had been a more close call thing. He had started showing signs of infection. It seemed an intestine had ripped slightly, probably due to excessive activity. She had managed to treat the infection, but he would be bedridden for at least a week before she would allow him to move around by himself, as to not risk another tear. After a night's sleep in a comfy bed, Sapphire had woken to Fengi softly shaking her awake. "Good morning, sleepyhead. We need to get you up. The others are getting impatient. I got your crutches." "Well, good morning," Sapphire said, looking around. No, Tom, goddammit. Had he gone to get something, or just not understood he was supposed to stay in bed? Fengi took her to the grand hall. Tom was indeed standing in the middle of the room, looking bewildered. "Ah, good of you to join us," Nunuk had called, sitting in her chair at the end of the grand table. "Sorry for waking you up, but we felt we needed to get this done before our guests decided to go further, exploring, yes. Morning, as usual, and decided that staying in bed was for the dead and dying. There was bound to be so much to explore here. Besides, he could just feign ignorance if it came to it. So he had popped a painkiller and gone exploring. He had gotten quite far, too. Seemingly no one was awake yet. That was until he had opened the door to what was clearly a bedroom full of children. He had tried his damnedest to close the door quietly, but the mission was a failure. One of the little critters had woken up, seen him, and immediately started rousing the others. Boy, did they seem excited, and sadly, they looked to have just as many teeth as the grown-ups. He had no clue what to do in this situation, so he did the only sensible thing he could think of and ran. So there he was, sprinting down the hallways, being chased by a small mob of flying lizards. They varied greatly in size, with the smallest being a little larger than a house cat, while the biggest were around the size of an 8-year-old. This had proven sufficient commotion for a guard to notice, who then went to inspect the source. The surprised guard nearly drew his sword at the sight of Tom running toward him with children in tow. Tom, for his part, elected to hide behind the guard, hoping he could control them. This was apparently not to be. The guard tried, but to little avail. The children stormed them both, and were soon crawling all over Tom, asking questions and tugging at his ears and hair. One child nearly pulled out one of his revolvers, and another did manage to snag his knife and run off with it. Luckily, this was when Esmeralda arrived on the scene, and she was not in her usual calm, friendly demeanor. Tom was honestly scared for a moment, at least until it became clear that he wasn't the target of her ire. Esmeralda had come down on them like an angry mother at the supermarket. The children nearly fled before lining up in a row and receiving a very stern talking to by Tom's reckoning. The guard, for his part, had stood there doing his best to look like a disappointed father. Esmeralda eventually took the children back to the dormitory, leaving the guard and Tom to stand there looking at each other. After a bit of staring, Tom let out a whistle of relief and smiled. This prompted another signature head tilt from the guard, who gestured for him to do it again. Well, no harm in that, Tom had thought, and began to whistle the melody from Expendables. He knew that one by heart. The guard had just continued staring, mouth slowly coming agape, until Esmeralda had returned and then started speaking rapidly to her. She had turned to look at Tom, who just let out another little whistle. She started giggling again, apparently finding this hilarious too. Why though, of course. With a snout like that, they couldn't whistle. Oh, he was such a muppet. Well, he might as well have some fun with this. As she laughed, he began doing his best songbird impression. When the guard tried to ask him something, or made various hand gestures at him, Tom would just look confused and whistle some more. Esmeralda had caught on rather quickly, and began trying to match the tones with her voice, as if to communicate with him that way, to the clear and utter bewilderment of the poor guard. After a minute or two of this, they had both broken down laughing at the poor guy's expense. Suddenly, Esmeralda's laughter cut off abruptly. Tom turned to see a distinctly unamused-looking old lady standing right behind him. Now, Maya gods was the 90. Sapphire had let out. He defied his doctor's orders to stay in bed. woke the children along with most of the rest of us, gave one of them a knife, and managed to convince Kokashi he is a songbird, Nunuk answered directly, seeming more than a little tired. Sorry, what? Esmeralda, can you make him do it again? Nunuk gestured toward Esmeralda, who made a bird-flapping motion at Tom with her hands. Tom answered with the sweetest bird song. You're joking! What can't this guy do? Sapphire exclaimed, laughing a bit. It hurt this time, though. She kind of wished she could have another of Tom's beads. Well, speak properly, for one thing. Apuma, you're up. Show us why I love you, Nunuk answered slyly, even if she still sounded a little tired. Right away, bring him over here. I prepared the circle already. Slowly, people started to arrive and sit down at the far side of the big horseshoe table, all eyes on him. The table ran along the walls of the quite sizable hall. Tom counted over 40 seats, even with a big open space in the middle. Damn, it seemed not all seats were in use, at least not currently. Sapphire and Fengi had been the last to arrive, bringing the count to around 20 present. The older male had moved Tom to an inscribed circle and instructed him to sit, so he complied. He sat directly in front of the old lady who had healed him. Judging by her elevated chair, she seemed to be the one in charge here. Then, the older male began chanting. As the words rang out, they became twisted and weird-sounding, almost blurry, Tom thought. He started feeling dizzy, his eyes losing focus. By now, the sound was just noise swirling around him, until, suddenly, he heard a voice again. Hello? Anybody home? Hello? Tom had answered. Ah, good, we may begin. You just need to stay within the circle, and this should work for a while, at least. Aha. Begin what exactly? Tom's head was still spinning. He was glad he was sitting down, that was for sure. Questioning, of course. As Tom's eyes snapped back into focus, he saw the old male dragonette standing in front of him. As icon in addition time, as icomic. This mastered, invitation that this team, part 1, as icomic, the people who are. 113, interrogation. This feels strange, but hi, I can understand you. Oh, this is awesome. This must be magic, right? Tom got very excited at the prospect of actually being able to ask questions. Yes, this is a translator's circle currently translating your words to ours and vice versa. The old man had clarified before stepping back. Well, hello. It came from the old lady. You shouldn't be getting out of your bed when healing, you know that, right? Sorry. I wanted to take a look around before you guys walk up, and why would you feel the need to snoop around alone? I kinda got bored. Tom really wanted a better explanation, but none came to him. Unfortunately. Sorry. No matter. You only managed to hurt yourself in doing so. Speaking of which, you took quite the pounding before Dakota found you, if I'm correct. You could say that, yes. It was a rough start. The buggers nailed me twice with that tail thing. Why, you are a tough little bastard. How long were you out? Wait, you took 2 doses, Dakota interjected, but you were back fighting in no time? Yeah, is that bad? No, it's just. We would be laying there for hours with 2 stabs. Well, Sapphire didn't need as many painkillers as I expected. Correlation, maybe? What are painkillers, and why did you give them to Sapphire? The old lady interjected, glaring at Dakota, seeming to not pleased to be cut off. Well, it's a medicine against pain, and she was in pain, so, the beads she talked about. I would rather you refrain from giving any of my people more of your medication. It seems to affect us differently. She was getting quite sick. I see. Tom suddenly got quite a bit smaller. Sapphire thought, clearly not happy with the news. I think the dosage might have been too high. She got 2 yesterday. I usually take 3 or 4 though. I see. Now, before we go on, I am Lady Nunuk Bismati, and this is my keep. You have met my daughter, Dakota, and her 4 huntresses. The kind gentleman standing before you is my husband, Apuma. To your right is my son, Ratchuk, first in command of the guard, and to your left is Anka, second in command of the guard. Seated around you are most of the people of this keep. And you are? Right, I'm Thomas Hansen, just call me Tom, ex-army, I guess, ex-mechanical engineer and explorer, now come to think of it, huh? Well, first, a pleasure to meet you, second, where are you from, and thirdly, what is a mechanical engineer and what army? Well, I'm from a country called Denmark. With is in Europa on a plan world called Earth. But as far as I have been able to figure out, no longer in that world. I'm not sure I follow. Nunuk seemed extremely skeptical, and there were much head-turning and squabbling among the rest of the people present. Then a puma interjected, "You're saying you are not just from far away? Where you're from doesn't exist here?" "Yeah, that is one way of putting it." Tom scratching his neck, looking at the floor. "How did you get here then, and what are you?" Nunuk had demanded. "I was sent, I believe, via magical transportation of some kind. I was given the offer by a stranger promising a life of adventure in a world I could only dream of. I agreed, packed my things, and ended up here. As for what I am, we call ourselves humans. To your earlier question, a mechanical engineer is a person who designs machines. Of us, shares, beguine down at the Rundi aha, shares and never to see, that was from a billion, knowledged the eep. Shares was all sapphire, had managed to get out. Their guest was from another world entirely. It certainly provided a good explanation for why he knew so little, yet seemed well prepared. As the questioning continued, a puma had started to take over, being the resident expert on law and the like. Apparently, Tom was from a world where there was no magic, but nearly everything he owns is magic. Fengi had burst out. "Is that so?" Nunuk said, turning to Tom. "It's not magic, it's technology and machines. We don't have magic. My guns use explosive powder to fling metal at my enemies. My quad bike burns fuel to move. My music box uses tamed lightning and metal circuitry to power it." "What is a quad bike?" Nunuk had asked, looking at Sapphire. "It's a cart that moves by itself, quite fast too. We raced it against Jackalope, and I won. Jackalope quick as always when it came to flaunting her success." "Okay then, so you don't have magic, and yet you can tame lighting and fire. How can that be?" "Well, Sue, you have metal, right? Forging is a way of taming fire. My people have just found more uses for it. You will probably master lighting too in time." "Right, this doesn't sound like something we can figure out quickly, so let's say I believe you. Why are you here and what do you want?" "I am an explorer looking for new things and experiences, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm in a place full of new. So, if possible, I would like to stay, at least for a while." "Okay then. Dakota tells me you are a friend, so you may stay, but you won't be staying on our good graces. You will have to pull your weight. Do you think that is possible?" "I believe I can do more than that, Your Highness. Lady Bismutai or Mum will do it. Gets formal enough in here already. Not to put a damper on things, but he won't. He'd be back to not speaking our language once he leaves the circle," Dakota had interjected. "Yes, that is a problem. For the time being, I'm guessing we will have to school you. You may add that to the debt of gratitude you owe my daughter for saving you. I just want to say, thus far Tom has been extremely friendly. He has shown us many new things and shared what he had with us. I'm certain having him stay will be of great reward in the long run." Dakota spoke up again. "No need to worry, Dakota. I'm not going to kick him out." Right. I guess I better go get my things then?" Tom had asked tentatively. "Not just yet. Anyone within this keep is sworn to defend it and those that call it home. I would have you take this oath if you are to stay here. You said you've been in the army before?" "Yes, ma'am. I was Danish Army, combat engineer, rank lieutenant, and volunteer in the Home Guard. An officer even. Well, in that case, the oath of the Guard will do. I think sounds like you have experience in the area too with this Home Guard." That seems fair enough. Tom didn't really know if this was a good idea, but he guessed it would earn him some more friends and a warmer welcome here. So far, his bad ideas had yielded better than 50-50 odds of success, so why not? Besides, he did want to stay here for a while at least. It wasn't like a few words could really hurt anyway. "Recite after me." Nunuk had stood up and walked in front of Tom, placing her right hand on her chest. "I solemnly swear to uphold the good name of this keep and the name of Bismati. I shall stand in the defense of my keep against any that would seek to harm it or those who call it home. I shall perform my duty by the will of my lord or lady and always remain vigilant. I shall not seek to do harm to that which I have sworn to protect, for such would be my undoing." Tom had recited the phrase as best he could. It took a try or two, but he got it in the end. Sapphire was stunned. The old lady really knew how to keep her cool. All that seemingly impossible information being thrown at her, and she just extracted an oath from the situation. "Well, you guard, I guess," she thought to herself. Well, with that, I believe you should get some rest. My husband will take you through another session or two like this, so we may learn and explain a thing or two, Nunuk continued. Until then, you should get some rest. It'll come around again to check that you didn't worsen your situation again. Not to be rude, but what about my quad bike cart? You really shouldn't touch it before I can show you how it works. We will leave it be for now, don't you worry. From what Dakota has been telling me, you have brought some dangerous things with you. Besides, we do not steal from one another. Nunuk glared a bit at Tom as if to emphasize her point on that last one. Best keep my fingers to myself, he thought. We will talk more tomorrow. With you in your bed this time. With you in your bed this time. Ah, number 8. Number 8. My was you abroad. With you in your bed this. The circle around him that had been glowing slightly faded. Apuma looked quite tired, as did Tom, who stumbled before being caught by Dakota. This was clearly demanding on the old man. Tom realized he would still need to learn the language as quickly as possible, as this method could not be relied upon. He was returned to the infirmary by the 2 guards and laid down. After a short while, Sapphire joined him along with the rest of the Huntresses. They spoke for a time, and Tom managed to get Esmeralda's attention. He made the gesture of a box and started humming a melody. She smiled widely at him, clearly getting the message. Teheosists, the Gemons had been time disassimilating, offers an image that the matter of the Valley of the Big Dakota had started. Wards a lot to unpack. Dakota had started as they made it towards the infirmary. He is even weirder than we thought, Esmeralda had added, and even crazier too. Imagine just being like, I don't like it here anymore. I'm just gonna leave everything and not be able to come back, maybe ever. Jackalope had a point, and it clearly didn't sit well with her. She had lost her home when she was little. The thought of willingly abandoning it was probably hard for her to handle. And he claims he doesn't know magic. I mean, come on, that is absurd. Fengi had chimed in, clearly not believing the stories they had just heard. As they entered the infirmary, Tom was already there looking at them as they entered. Well, he is both the weirdest and kindest stranger I have ever met. So, I think he might be telling the truth, Sapphire concluded. They continued to discuss what exactly they were to do. He needed to learn Draconic and stay in his bed, and they needed to store his things somewhere. For now, though, he was stuck here with Sapphire. I might as well get started with him. Let's start with yes, no, and other simple things. Hey, where are you going, Essie? He wants the music box, Esmeralda said, running out the door. Right, of course he did. At least this shouldn't be a boring stay, Sapphire thought to herself. How am I supposed to keep him in bed for a week anyway? Make him want to. He clearly wants to learn, so be interesting, Dakota had said, sounding a bit too sassy, Sapphire thought. Very helpful. Maybe we can get him some more toys from his Kivuatsiki. The word was hard to pronounce, and it didn't sound quite right. She began to wonder if he could even speak their language. She certainly found his hard. You make him sound like a kid in need of entertainment, Dakota had pointed out. Well, how would you describe him? Jackalope clearly finding the comparison apt. This is gonna be a long week. Sapphire sighed, laying down at last. As it was being a brew, happing cakes, time, forwarding trectus in quality. I can see Ike. The Obosistrus 1000, simiches of 14 pancakes. Tom had spent damn near 2 decades on a school bench, and now he was back at it. It did help pass the time, though, as it was clear that he was not allowed to leave his bed without supervision, and that he should move as little as possible at all times. Apuma and Nunuk had come to him for his next translation sessions. They had exchanged as many questions as time would allow. Yes, indeed, he was on a floating island. The keep had been here for hundreds of years. Lady Bismutai was in charge, and she was, in turn, a vassal of the king of somewhere names didn't translate well. He would be treated as a member of the keep for as long as he held his oath, and hunted down and killed if he broke it. Okay then, he thought, they could have mentioned that. He could work with it, though. They'd asked many questions about the things he had brought, his weapons, and anything else they could think of. The weapons especially seemed to interest the lady, but Tom had refrained from explaining too much. He wanted to be sure that giving these people the concept of firearms was a good idea. It hadn't been hard to keep things vague. They were on a timer, after all. About 20 minutes was all the Apuma could muster at a time. For his part, The Apuma was more interested in where Tom came from. But Tom had managed to convince him that was a subject for more than 20 minutes of discussion. Sapphire had taken it upon herself to teach him the basics of Draconic while he was bedridden. She could hobble around on her crutches by herself now, so she slept in her own room. However, there clearly wasn't much for her to do with the others being busy most of the time. Still, all the other huntresses came by to say hello at least a few times a day. Esmeralda had brought him his speaker, and since he had his backpack with him, he had a few power banks. However, he would need the solar chargers before long. Even so, it was good fun watching the others listen to new kinds of music for the first time. Sapphire was clearly a fan of the more fast-paced action variety. She had taken right to Two Steps from Hell. It probably helped that there weren't any lyrics to try and understand. Esmeralda liked to be happy and upbeat, and she loved it if there were bits she could sing along to, even if she had no idea what was being said. Come to think of it, that was true of humans too, so it wasn't that weird. Dakota was into metal. The warrior song had really clicked with her, it seemed. Jackalope had taken to rock and roll, and a bit of metal too. And Fengi just loved anything with a dance beat. It was really rather funny how music transcended language. Nunuk and Apuma had been very curious about the speaker, but seemed content that it wasn't dangerous after a short inspection. As the days had gone by, people had come to visit. They had introduced themselves, talked with Sapphire for a bit. Some brought small gifts too. All looked curiously at Tom. Some had stayed for a while to listen to the music before Sapphire had shooed them out and continued her lessons. Their language was a strange one. You used your throat for most of the sounds rather than the mouth, and his had gotten quite sore during the first few days. He guessed he would get used to it, but for now, it was really quite painful. He had tried to teach Sapphire a few words of English, as it would be the most useful Earth language for her to learn after all. She struggled to produce some of the sounds, though, resulting in a truly hilarious accent. She had seemed impressed that he spoke multiple languages already, even if none of them were useful in the given situation. All that work for nothing, he thought to himself. The whole sleeping less thing was also getting annoying. There was nothing to do in the early hours of the morning. After 3 mornings of doing nothing, he decided it was time for another expedition. He had been brought breakfast every day, even if it was more like a brunch by his timescale. It usually consisted of boiled whole eggs, bread, roast meat, and a few vegetables. He was going to make breakfast today, though. Finding the kitchens wasn't hard, but the fact there was nothing sweet there did hinder his plans to make pancakes a little. They loved sweet things so much but had nothing sweet? Must have eaten it all, he thought to himself. They had plenty of meat and eggs milk, though. He found some smoked meat that he sliced as thinly as he could manage to try and make bacon. The cooking process was complicated a little by the whole open fire thing, but he was used to camping, so not too much trouble. He used the bacon to make bacon pancakes. They came out pretty good, if not quite the real deal. The meat wasn't cured and very gamey. It would do, though. He then set about making scrambled eggs, with bacon in it too, of course. If he had just had his stuff, he could have made this so much better. But in the end, his supplies were limited, so this would be the way at some point anyway. Besides, if he was cooking for 20, his stuff wouldn't last long. As he was working, mumbling a little tune to himself, he had become completely lost in his work. Somebody cleared their voice in the doorway. He froze, as if that would help him in his current situation, then slowly looked up to see one of the guards that had first come out to meet them, and Fengi standing looking at him. "Hungry?" Fengi had asked, looking quite accusatory. The guard said something to him. Tom thought he could make out the word steal in there, and the guard didn't seem happy. "Oh no, breakfast." He tried sounding as innocent as he could, gesturing at the large plates of food. Breakfast. The guard searched him and found nothing that wasn't supposed to be there, even if he took the chance to examine some of the items he found, clearly not understanding what they were. "You just cooked for us?" Fengi sounded more quizzical now, he thought. "Yes, pancakes." Fengi tilted her head at the odd word and tried to emulate it. "Pancakes?" "Yes." Tom handed the meat a hot bacon pancake and crossed his fingers. So far, his food adventures had been a success. Judging by Fengi's pupils, he had succeeded once again. She held up her finger to her mouth. "No say. Now follow." Tom nodded and followed Fengi out of the kitchen, looking back to see the guard already going for a second pancake. "Well, that went well." "Sort of," he mused as he got back into his bed, and Fengi closed the door upon leaving. The one, in. It was clear he was used to being a student. From what Sapphire had gathered during the week, he had spent most of his life learning. They had managed to get greetings done, as well as simple tasks like asking for something. They had started on numbers. At least he seemed to use the same counting system as them, with only the names being different. There had been some confusion with the numbers between 10 and 20, but they had figured it out. He also talked about something called percentages, which Sapphire didn't understand. However, he had left that subject alone for now. Tom, for his part, had started trying to teach her a bit of English. Sapphire had thought it was his mother tongue, but as they spoke over a delicious breakfast made by Fengi and Balathon, they had gotten to the subject of his home country. Apparently they spoke a language he called Danish. She had questioned him on how many languages he knew, and he had answered 5. Sapphire had gone to find Apuma when she learned this. Apuma was also enjoying his share of the funny flatbread with meat, and had nearly fallen off his chair when Sapphire told him. He was lore master of the keep, an accomplished scholar, and educated in the capital. Yet he knew only 3. When he had tried to ask Tom how many languages he knew existed, Tom had answered hundreds, so there was clearly still some work to do on the numbers. It was an arduous process to teach the human. His endurance was damn near frightening. He would go on for hours, listening intently, trying to formulate sentences and asking questions. Sapphire was equal parts impressed and despaired. Her head was sore after just the first day. But the more the man learned, the more he tried to teach her in return. Even if most of it was impossible to understand, it was fascinating to learn about a different world. Apparently, he came from the countryside and grew up in a small town. Later, he had studied in a massive city with over 1 million people in it. Sapphire could hardly comprehend what a city of 1 million people must look like. If Tom had gotten the numbers right this time, that is. Besides, Apuma had to stop the daily sessions. They were getting too expensive. The materials for such rituals were not cheap and only available through trade. So for now, Sapphire was the main way of communicating with Tom. When Tom was feeling better, it had been decided he should join Apuma's classes with the children. There, he would learn the alphabet as well as more complicated things like grammar, so Sapphire just had to focus on vocabulary and pronunciation. When he was considered fully recovered, he would join the guard. They had figured out that Tom didn't sleep as much as they did, so he would be well suited to standing guard. And judging by the fact that he didn't carry a sword or spear, there was a good chance he had no clue how to use one. That just wouldn't do. Following their great breakfast, Fengi and Balathon had been charged with making breakfast twice a week from now on. Although the decision had spurred some protest, they refused to tell their secrets on how they had made the first one. Sapphire had a growing suspicion as to why that might be, and she made a note to try and check on Tom as soon as she got up from now on. The story had a bait, the waiting of million big on the whites of raking of fland. When she opened the door, she found that in preparation for his first class, Tom had stripped himself of all harmful or delicate objects, and he had put them all in Sapphire's room without permission. Needless to say, she wasn't pleased. What was even more disturbing was that the door had been locked when she left and was locked again when she returned. Apparently, locks didn't slow him down much either. At least it didn't look like he had touched anything. He had simply left his things in a neat little pile right in the middle of the room. Cirque, the highest and possible salver, was a stade of merry. The things Ron is a find in things about. He had been an outsider for much of his life, especially in the backwater school of his hometown. He hadn't played sports and was more interested in cars, tanks, and books about science fiction and fantasy. As he made his way to the library, where Sapphire had shown him the class would be held, he couldn't help but feel like he was going to be even more of an outlier this time. Why did the thought of being bullied by someone he could squash with ease bother him so much? Perhaps it was the fact that he had technically broken into a woman's bedroom. Though with their pathetic locks, it was hardly more difficult than just opening the door. He had needed a safe space for his things, and he was yet to find a place to sleep himself. So far, he had stayed in the infirmary, but that couldn't last, and he certainly couldn't store his weapons there. As he stood in front of the door to the library, he heard some far too exciting-sounding noises coming from behind him. He had learned enough Draconic to make out the words, "Big Friend," just as he turned to see a single kid already in a running leap toward him. The kid was about the size of a small dog. Not the smallest he had seen, but still quite tiny. It latched onto his leg and hugged tight. It was easily the cutest thing he had ever seen. Its eyes and ears were oversized, and its wings were so small it likely couldn't fly yet. As Tom stood there pondering the correct action for this situation, the door opened behind him. Feeling happy, a voice said. At least, Tom thought that was what had been said. He turned back to see a bemused-looking puma in his long, dragging coat, whitish, grey and blue, as was clearly the fashion around here. Puma was quite a bit shorter than Tom, standing around 165 centimeters without the horns, which reached up to about eye level. He looked almost like a grandpa welcoming Tom into his house, even if Tom didn't have a clue how old the guy actually was. The kid let go and sprinted inside, and Tom followed after. Well, this didn't feel like bullying, he thought to himself, and the one to the burst. Trining, and this, not this day out of her mind. One and arm sister, with this the mestistic Sapphire, lay in her room, pondering what to do with all the time she now had on her hands. She found herself bored out of her mind. There was simply nothing for her to do. She couldn't even clean with her crutches. She had decided that the most interesting thing she could do was watch Tom try to fit into a class of children. That ought to be good fun, she mused, and made her way towards the library. Besides, she would like some payback after all. The scene that greeted her more than met her expectations. Sitting on the ground with his legs folded, Tom was the largest being in the room. He had 2 kids in his lap and 1 on his head. All eyes were pointed at the board, where a puma was currently going through the alphabet. So, what's the topic for the day? She said, all eyes turning to her as she let her presence be known. The answer was a mixed cacophony of kids trying to greet her, tell her to be quiet, and explain what they had been learning. Puma let out a sigh, resigned to the fact that it would take some time before he could continue. Tom looked a bit worried, and Sapphire served him with a look that indicated he was right to worry. He simply pointed to one of the kids in his lap, as if he wasn't guilty of whatever crime he was being accused of. Or perhaps he was worried about the kids. It was hard to tell. Thought I might as well drop in to see how the old man is treating you. Hey, I'm not that old. How old? Tom had joined in. Well, I'm a mere 92, why thank you. Old. Tom had gone in response, to much amusement of a few of the children, who also joined in telling the world just how old they were. Kiran, who was currently perched on top of Tom's head, had let out, I'm 3, I am big, prompting Tom to pick Kiran up in his hands and bring him down in front of his face, looking quizzical. 3? Yes, Tom Kiran has just started. He is just over 3 years old. Puma had clarified. Grow fast, Tom had just answered. Then put Kiran back on his head, seemingly perfectly content with the passenger. I am big, yea warm soft. Kiran had let out upon being set down again into Tom's hair. Oh yeah, Sapphire had said, seeming to remember something. I don't recall ever getting the chance before. She hobbled over and ruffled Tom's hair, so soft, looking at all the children with a fiendish smile on her face. This had seemingly been the excuse half of the classroom was waiting for as they all came running over to touch Tom's hair. Hair continued to sex Tom's hair. Tom's hair was once again under attack. This time, faced by a group of excited children led by a trained aerial huntress, he didn't stand a chance. He wondered if this was her way of punishing him for putting his things in her room without the key. Yeah, that seemed likely. She had at least tried to prevent the little ones from pulling too much on his hair, even if she wasn't entirely successful. In his hour of need, Kiran had proven a valuable ally, defending his nest fiercely. Tom had opted for a fighting retreat, focusing on keeping enemy ground forces from climbing up by using his height advantage, while Kiran picked up the slack. The strategy failed, however, when Tom hit a step and fell over backward. After some rolling on the floor while being swarmed by enemy combatants, Kiran was forced to surrender his position. With all defenses overrun and the territory currently in the hands of the children, Puma finally stepped in to restore order, stepped in and put a stop to the games in its doesn't tensiver. Stephanist have to be Niter was lying on his back, laughing like a maniac, when Puma stepped in and put a stop to the games before someone got hurt. Sapphire couldn't blame the old man. It had been a spectacular fight. Little Kiran had acquitted himself with valor, she thought. It was clear that quite a bit of Dakota had gotten through to him. Even at that age, he showed no fear. This is supposed to be a classroom, Not a sparring ring, Applemar said as he went around the room, getting everybody back to their places. By the gods, behave yourselves for once. Well, Saf, if you are going to so rudely interrupt my class, you might as well make yourself useful. How about a story to get everyone to calm down? I guess I can do that. Sapphire made her way over to a chair, sitting down and getting comfortable. Yay, real story, Kiran let out, prompting an overly hurt look from a puma. Let's go with the little deer in the woods today, shall we? The children were quick to quiet down in anticipation of the story to come. Even Tom seemed to understand what was going on and turned to Sapphire. Once upon a time, there was a young deer bounding through the woods with its mother. It was a happy little deer, hopping around without a care in the world. While playing, it spotted a little jackalope and chased after it, hoping to make a new friend. As the two bounded through the woods, the jackalope found a hole and hid from the little deer, for it didn't want to play. The deer was sad. It had hoped to find a playmate, but as it looked around, the little deer realized it didn't know where it was, for it had never been to this part of the forest before. Most frightening of all, it could no longer see its mother. Oh no! It came from little Kiran. The little deer began running through the woods again, calling out, searching for it had lost its mother. It did not know where it had lost her. It had just been playing, and suddenly she was gone. There was much gasping and murmuring from her audience. The little deer searched and searched all day, but it found no sign of its mother. The little deer had gotten very sad and lay down, not sure what to do. Its mother always knew what to do, but it couldn't find her. It lay there for some time, not knowing what to do, trying to think, until it noticed it would be getting dark soon. The little deer got up in a big hurry, trying to find a place to hide for the night. Its mother had always told it, "You need to hide at night, for that is when the wolves come, both big and small." Sapphire thought she had done a quite good job of building a sense of suspense. As she looked around, most of the kids seemed to be on the edge of their seats. Some of the youngest even hid behind someone larger. A few had chosen Tom, of course, and Kiran had crawled into Tom's arms now and was listening intently, eyes wide. The little deer found a little bush to hide in. It thought it was safe for the night, that no one would find it. But sadly, it was mistaken. 10. For as the night drew on, the wolves caught the scent of the little deer and followed it to the little bush. The little deer heard snarling in the night and knew it had been found. Its little heart sank with dread, for it knew the wolves would kill it. Kiran let out a little snarl, and Tom, seeming absent-minded, began petting the young dragonet as if to calm him down. The little deer turned to run. It came out of its bush and ran as fast as it could, bounding through the wood. But it could hear the wolves running behind it, catching up, getting closer. The little deer was already tired, having searched all day for its mother, as the wolves howled a terrifying howl into the night. "Awoo!" The little deer began to cry as it ran. It just wanted to find its mother, and now it was going to get eaten. It just wasn't fast enough to get away. Anatashi, one of the young girls hiding behind Tom, began to cry too. Tom reached around to pull her into his lap, starting to pet her hair to comfort her. But as the deer ran, it heard a mighty roar. Sapphire did her best to sound fearsome as she roared at the children. Even Tom seemed taken aback by this, she mused to herself, trying her best not to giggle. The roar came from above, and a strange being came down in front of the little deer. The deer froze, looking up into the bright green eyes staring down at it. The wolves had come running, yapping and howling through the night, but with a swift strike from the being, the first wolf went running into the dark, squealing like a little piglet. There was much rejoicing among the children, with Kiran letting out the cutest little roar. The other wolves circled them, snarling at the little deer and the strange being with the bright green eyes. They yapped and howled, trying to scare them. Then, a pointy stick hit one of the wolves in the side. The little deer jumped with glee as the wolves howled in pain and fled into the night, never to be seen again. More rejoicing came from the children. Some of them tried to sound like scared wolves, while the others just laughed. The strange being with the bright green eyes had smiled at the little deer and told it to run off now, for it still needed to find its mother. And so the little deer ran through the woods once more, calling for its mother. The very next day, the worried mother found her little deer, having looked everywhere for it. To this day, the little deer still looks to the sky, trying to catch a glimpse of the being with the bright green eyes. and every once in a while it sees a pair of wings flying high above the trees. The kids all let out little roars of approval and beat their wings slightly. Tom had begun smacking his hands together, seeming to have enjoyed the story too. It earned him some strange looks until he stopped and looked around, realizing no one else was hitting themselves. He muttered something to himself, apparently a tad confused. Simulating. The idea bist it steintet spitting strange, and ease, a finding steps the brine with their inspent in common nature. The design technificing, once abiding companies the story, but it was damned hard. He had gotten the gist of it though. He squinted at Sapphire, wondering if that story was entirely made up or not. The roar certainly had seemed real enough. She sounded more like an angry tiger than a person. Also, clapping was apparently not a shared cultural trait, which made for a quite awkward moment. Little Kieran and the girl who had started crying halfway through were now both in his lap, curled around each other and seeming quite content with the world. Tom had quickly learned that the fact he was warm all the time made him very comfortable for the cold-blooded dragonettes. Tom had never actually had much to do with kids. He was an only child and had never felt the need to play the uncle role before. So, when the little critters had become upset, he didn't really know what to do. Besides, who was to say human children and little dragonettes responded the same way? So, he had begun petting them like you would a cat or a dog. It had seemed to work. Even after they had calmed down, they were remarkably okay with it, so he had just kept going. It was a weird experience to be sure, both funny and relaxing. Now, though, he found himself with two sleeping dragonettes in his lap, and a puma was apparently intending to get back to the lesson. Sapphire had just moved to a different chair over in a corner and was watching him gleefully. What to do? What to do? He couldn't wake them up. That would be like moving a sleeping cat. It was not allowed. Wait, is that racist? Or speciesist? God damn it. A puma glaring at Tom, clearly amused, sorry, had been Tom's response. Well, you're not the one sleeping in my class now, are you? Perhaps we should make you tuck them in at night. You seem quite adept. I couldn't get Kieran to sleep that quickly, if I tried, especially after one of Sapphire's little stories. I think your inadvertent efforts are more effective anyway, a puma. Sapphire piped up, getting up to move to a chair in the corner. Hey, that isn't called for. Just because my stories come from books doesn't mean they are boring in the slightest. Tom had tilted his head at this, probably not understanding everything that was being said. Child care, Sapphire had clarified. Tom looked downright horrified at the realization. Oh, calm now. That isn't a bad job. Perhaps you would rather be stuck on breakfast duty. Tom seemed to consider for longer than Sapphire would have thought before answering. Me? Nanny? Well, if it is a nanny's job to help look after children, then yes. Besides, you need a place to sleep. All eyes had turned to look at Tom to see if they would all be getting a new sleeping buddy. Tom had been silent for a long while longer before, nodding. Okay. And with that, the class was back into chaos. It had at least woken up Tom's two sleepy charges, and after a few minutes of running around, the puma had gotten the class back into order with a bit of help from Sapphire and Tom. That was pierced antover of time and stating the stoge, and hymns of riches, Florence, and Titian. The Interbuchail, Chapter 6 and Tom. The nanny Tom had thought he would have to help with the children, which he was perfectly okay with. They were cute and all, but apparently he was going to be sleeping in the big room with all of them. Well, shit. That wasn't entirely what he had in mind when he thought about getting a place other than the infirmary. He really needed a place to store his stuff. All his things had very graciously been flown or carried up for him and placed in the big hangar space, most likely so he wouldn't start going up and down the stairs all the time to grab things. Nunuk was still very adamant that he move as little as possible after all. His quad bike had been moved to one of the barns for the time being, so he just needed a private room to unpack in. That was apparently a big ask, though. Sapphire had just answered that you needed to respect privacy to get privacy. Oh, come on. So, there he was, lying down in a room full of kids, wondering what exactly he was supposed to do now. From what he had gathered, once Nunuk deemed his wounds were fully healed, he would start training with the guard. That sounded fun and all, but he guessed that meant training with a sword, shield, and arrow. That was probably smart, though, just in case he needed to defend himself with the locally available means. Besides, He had yet to decide if he wanted to impart weapons technology to them, though it seemed inevitable that if he taught them about machining and chemistry, they would figure it out themselves in time. He just didn't want to jump the gun on that point. He still needed a place to keep his things. Currently, he didn't even have a weapon on him, trusting that everything was going to be fine. That didn't sit quite right with Tom. Sure, he was probably in the safest place in the keep, but what if? He had no clue what kind of dangers were out there. There were guards posted 24 hours a day, though, so there was definitely something to worry about, he thought to himself. He decided on bringing his little lockbox into the kids' room, stuffed with a revolver holster and ammo, along with a flashlight and knife. That would have to do, he thought to himself. During the following days, he had been conversing with the kids as much as he could, hoping the old saying that you only hear the truth from children and drunk men held true. It had proved somewhat correct. He had learned a lot about how things worked there. The huntresses were the main source of meat during the spring, summer, and autumn, while the animals they kept were reserved for the winter. With their diet being primarily meat, they went through quite a few animals. The female warriors formed the huntresses, while the males made up the guard, though everyone there was combat trained to an extent, much like a militia, he guessed. The huntresses and guards would help out with odd jobs when not on duty. Like when Fengi and that one guard caught him making breakfast, it was apparently their turn to do so, and they hadn't even said thank you. The kids also confirmed what he had begun to suspect. The women were all a bit larger and stronger flyers. The men were smaller, but still sturdily built, coming close to matching the women in sheer strength. Their society was also dominated by females, thus making Dakota the current heir to Nunuk, or Lady Bismati if one was being formal. Kiran was apparently Dakota's son. She had cared for him herself for the first year, plus the time on the nest, which sounded like half a year. So they were born as eggs. Interesting, Tom thought. After the first year, Kiran joined the other children in the nursery. School started at age 3 and lasted until age 10, at which point you would join a section of the keep to learn a profession. It was a damned quick process, Tom realized, even if they didn't learn much beyond what was required for their day-to-day lives. The local school was more like a kindergarten with structured classes. According to one of the older kids, if you wanted to pursue a more formal education, you had to leave for one of the larger cities, just as Apuma had done. Apparently, Dakota also had a younger sister currently in the capital undergoing that level of education. Tom had asked how old they get. One of the older kids had heard the tale of an old lady who was over 140 years old. This was apparently rare for them, though, so a bit longer lifespan. Tom had concluded not too much, though. It made sense with them being cold-blooded after all. Kiran wanted to be a guard when he grew up. The second in command of the guard, Anka, was his father after all, so why wouldn't he want to? When Tom had said he was going to start training with the guard soon, Kiran had insisted on coming along, going as far as to not let go of Tom's legs till he promised. Tom had continued his questioning of the kids. Dakota had 2 sons, Kiran and Holdy, the latter of whom was a bit older. Holdy wanted to be a blacksmith. The little guy seemed like a bit of a pyromaniac to Tom, so the profession fit perfectly. He made a mental note to check out the blacksmith soon. The little girl who had started crying during story time was Esmeralda's daughter, Anatashi. She and her brother were both 4 years old and seemed very gentle, just like their mother. One big family then, Tom concluded. He wondered how they navigated the whole Sweet Home Alabama situation, but decided that wasn't really a conversation to have with children. He had been a nanny for a few days by now, and it honestly hadn't sucked as much as he had feared. There was no diaper changing. They were remarkably tidy, and he was otherwise occupied with his lessons under Sapphire and his extra tutoring with Apuma. And it results of the time, the rate, the holiday, and the heim, with big strewing, while Tane, or watching meals, with watch and hereditary and time. The Britch, the Rostoveration and proved Sapphire, had started showing him around the keep and introducing him to everyone properly. Right now they were standing outside the smithy waiting for the door, Sapphire having knocked. Smith? Tom had asked. Yes, Tom, Smith. Shiva had opened the door looking down at the 2 of them. Jackalope's mother was easily the largest of them all, and with a broken horn, a missing eye, and a wooden leg, her wide shoulders gave her quite the presence. Tom did a double take of the intimidating-looking woman. So, now it's my turn to meet the stranger. Shiva said, seemingly amused by the unexpected visitors. Hi. I'm Tom. Tom went in his best draconic, holding out his hand. Hi, Shiva. She took the hand after a moment's hesitation. Sapphire, you've been teaching him? Well, me and Apama. He is learning quickly, but there is still quite a while to go. May we come in? I think he wants to look around. Sure. Does he know not to touch hot things? Yes, hot, bad. It came from Tom, seemingly impatient to get inside. Okay then, follow on. And Shiva seemed surprised he had followed the conversation at least somewhat. Tom had immediately started going around looking at everything and was writing things down in a little booklet, even if the thing was made of the finest paper Sapphire had ever seen. He didn't seem worried in the slightest about bringing it to a blacksmith. For her part, she had just given up trying to understand Tom's way of valuing things. He's almost like the world's worst spy. He can certainly write, though. Shiva mused. Find anything interesting? Human use? Long old Tom's amateur draconic, clearly being pushed to its limits. No use. No, now. I think he just called your equipment old-fashioned. Sapphire sounded a bit worried about the reaction to such an insult. Well, aren't you rude little bastard? Shiva said with some merriness to her tone. Oh, thank the gods she won't beat the shit out of him yet, Sapphire let out. A little sigh of relief. The sexty was the word, but tolls as the apparently a center for the first, just at the words impossible, with Powan and the sext. The smithy was much like Tom had expected, a large open forge and several rows of hand tools. Shiva was apparently the smith around here. She was also the largest dragonette he had seen so far, standing nearly 2 meters tall, not counting her remaining horn, which added at least another 20 meters in height. She wasn't thin or lanky either. With her eye patch, peg leg, and broken horn, she looked more like a buff pirate than a blacksmith. She reminded him a little of Jackalope, but she was much older. He placed her around 50 to 55, which he guessed was probably more like 75 in dragonette years. The kids had said Sapphire was 31 years old, but he had no idea if a year was as long here, and he would put her in her early 20s. He decided against asking the smith her age, though. She had already seemed to take offense at him calling her tools old. As he looked around, he started making plans. If he was going to make anything useful, he would need a workshop. While this place lacked a few things, it was a good starting point. Besides, they had some wind-powered automation driving the forge bellows. Fit for expansion, he thought. What metal? Have. God damn it, these sounds were hard to make, but she seemed to understand well enough. She waved him to follow and walked out into a small storage room hidden behind a curtain. There were several small metal bars on shelves, as well as broken tools, weapons, and armor. There was even an instrument or two in the little room. At first glance, Tom could see mostly steel and cast iron. There was a little of what looked like bronze, lead, tin, and a single brass horn. He saw no precious metals, though those would probably be kept somewhere else. However, he knew they at least had copper, silver, and gold. Seeing the selection heightened his spirits, as they had the most common metals. He hadn't been expecting to find aluminum or anything of that nature anyway. Brass was very important, and since it was in the scrap pile, it might not be that expensive. Judging by the size of the metal bars, however, metal was a costly commodity around here. The bars only looked to be a pound or two each. He had been hoping for a big stack of large ingots, but thinking back, he realized that had been quite wishful thinking. He had asked for the names of each metal and written it down as best he could in English letters. He hadn't got started on writing Draconic. He barely spoke it yet. To be honest, he felt like a tourist on a guided tour with some locals. At least Shiva seemed to find it interesting to learn what her metals were called in other languages. With a list of tools and available materials in hand, he could start planning. His first priority should be machine tools, he thought. He needed a lathe and a milling machine first of all. That was going to be quite the project in and of itself, and they clearly didn't have the materials for it. Not to mention, he would need some way of making large castings. The current facilities were clearly designed for forging instead of casting. Those were problems for later, though. For now, he needed to focus on learning rather than teaching. Maybe he could get started by figuring out the supply situation. This is a dental and exciter of the D's work. He had begun spending his mornings preparing for those lessons, attempting to read a few books Apuma had lent him. It wasn't of much use yet, however. since the alphabets were completely different and he didn't really understand anything. Consequently, he elected to start going through his own books instead, for the time being at least, to see if he could find something useful. He hadn't read most of them yet, so he figured he might as well get familiar with his own collection. While he was walking back to the dormitory, Sapphire caught him. She asked to see the book, and he obliged. She then promptly asked where he had gotten it from. He answered that he had brought it with him, and when he made it clear that he had quite a few books, she told him to wait there and left in a hurry. So there he was, standing in a corridor with a book, while she hobbled off on her crutches to go somewhere. Why was she even up this early when nobody else was? And why was his book such a big deal? Oh yeah, he hadn't mentioned he brought books with him. Well, in that case, chances were good she was going to get Apuma. This could be fun. No matter, she thought. This was much better. She become uncompetition. Managed to catch Tom in the early morning hours, even though he had been nowhere near the kitchens. No matter, she thought, this was much better. Tom had been carrying a book, claiming to have retrieved it from his pile of stuff. She had questioned him on what kind of book he had, and he had answered that it was about farming. A strange choice for morning reading, she thought, but no matter. She had asked to see the book. It was all written in the same strange script she had seen him write before. The pages, too, were impossibly thin, pure white and shiny. There were beautiful drawings that looked just like the real thing. She couldn't even begin to comprehend how someone could paint something like that. Sapphire had asked if he had more books, and he answered yes, around 30. Tom's draconic had reached a point where she believed that number, so she had gone to get Apuma as quickly as possible. She'd tried to do it quietly so as not to wake Nunuke, but the plan immediately failed when Apuma heard why he should get up. If the loud exclamations of "What?" and "Are you sure?" didn't do the trick, him jumping on the bed at confirmation definitely did. What in the gods' names do you think you are doing? It had come from the other part of the bed, from a very tired and annoyed-sounding Nunuka. He brought books, my dear, he brought books from another world. I must see them quickly now, Sapphire. Where do you say he is now? Jeez. Go look at your books then. Just don't wake me up before breakfast again, understood? Yes, yes, I have work to do. See you, sweetheart. Nanook had answered in a sort of indignant harumph and rolled over on her other side. Tom had been patiently waiting for them and led them to the greeting hall where his belongings were being stored for the moment. He made his way to the large chest Sapphire had been lying on and opened it. Inside were many things Sapphire did not recognize. A tangle of black strings, weird boxes, and other objects made from strange materials. There was also what was very clearly a small library of books, all crafted like the one Tom was already carrying. Tom selected one of the books and handed it to Apuma. English. Tom had gone handing it over. Oh my God, Sapphire, you weren't joking. Look at the pages, so thin and delicate. I think that is a book on his language. He said English. That is what it's called. Or maybe he's just saying it's in English, not sure. Well, that will surely be handy. Look at that drawing, so lifelike. You should see the one he was holding that was even crazier. It looked like the real thing, rather than a painting or drawing. Sapphire gestured at the book Tom had been carrying. He handed it over. Sapphire delicately found a page showing a plant or some kind of flower. Look, you almost can't tell. Incredible. How would you make that? Picture Tom had gone in English, beginning to ruffle through the big box, bringing out a weird-looking small box. I take you. Picture Tom step back a bit and there was a flash of light. Apuma, who was busy with the books, gave a flinch. Sapphire, too, was startled by the flash of light. Tom just laughed a bit and walked back to them. See, you... He held up the little box, and on the backside was now a perfect painting of Sapphire and Apuma from a moment ago. How? Is that not magic? Come on, Tom. It must be. Sapphire did her best to sound skeptical, but even if it was magic, it was still amazing. The pictures, as he called them in the books, were actually real things then, huh? Must have been a lot of work, judging by the size of the book. No magic, Tom insisted. I see. I don't even know where to start, Apuma admitted. English. Tom repeated, pointing at the book in Apuma's hands. I teach when... Say good. You too? He said, looking to Sapphire. Yes, why yes, of course. Besides, you have already started with me. Sapphire had never learned another language before, but one had to be the first, and she might just end up as one of the only people in the world who knew it. That was quite something. Apuma wasn't just for show. Knowledge was power after all. Thank you, Tom. That is very generous of you, I humbly accept. Might I ask, how is this made? Apuma held up the book and pointed to the pages. Yes? Tom had gone looking at Apuma. Yes, Tom, accept, teach. Apuma, realizing he had overreached Tom's limited understanding, how made he went, holding up the book. Printing machine. Big thing of metal and tricky. Tom was clearly trying his best, but the fact that their language probably didn't have words for half of what he was talking about didn't help the poor guy. Right. I'm not sure I understand, Apuma had to admit. Fool. Dom had started looking through the books again. Sapphire had set the book down and started turning pages, looking at the pretty pictures, when she stopped on one of a weird big green and yellow thing. It almost reminded her of Tom's quad bike, but it was massive and pulling something large and metal. It was plowing. Tom, what that? She explained, pointing at the picture. Tractor. Tom had answers after taking a quiet look. Pull things. See, farmer? He pointed to a big glass box on the back of the beast, and sure enough, there was a human sitting in there. Apuma, that thing is scary. Look, it's pulling so many plows at once and it's huge. It must be as strong as a dragon, if not stronger, and they are using it for farming. And look at the glass, so pretty and round. Tom, tractor normal? Apuma had asked. Yes, have thousands, he answered nonchalantly. This time it was Sapphire's turn to go unsteady on her feet. Thousands? She asked, seeking to clarify. Yes, in Denmark. In world, millions. Tom seemed perfectly serious, of a little nonchalant about the facts Sapphire thought. Now she just sat down looking into the distance, contemplating how much farming an army of dragons thousands strong could manage. Tom, how many people home? Tom pondered it for a moment, seemingly not knowing the number in Draconic, or perhaps he was unsure. In the end, he just wrote down a long series of zeros with a 7 at the front, and went in world and did a hand gesture as if to indicate thereabouts. Oh my gods. Apuma, what is that? 7 billion. Tom, how many in Denmark? Tom wrote down a smaller number. 5.5 million, Apuma said, sounding very somber. That was insane. How could there be so many people? The capital was home to 100,000, maybe 200,000 at most. They had done some questioning to try and find out more. Tom claimed there were cities with over 10 million people in them, and some with nearly 30 million. That was likely more people in one place than Sapphire believed existed in total. Tom, what kind of army? Tom had frowned at the question, but still obliged. In-world millions, many machines too. Sapphire was just staring into the distance. Well, at least he hadn't answered billions too. Be honest, millions was low compared to the number of people he'd been talking about. It was still more than anything Sapphire even heard fairy tales of. It was insane. She was imagining ranks upon ranks of soldiers stretching as far as the eye could see. Can they come here? She had let out deep in contemplation. No, don't worry, Tom had answered matter-of-factly. Well, that is something at least. Apuma was standing stiff, trying to process what he had just heard, and Sapphire was just looking into the middle distance. They would have to tell Nunuk about this. Tom seemed a little sad and confused by the response, but it looked like he was adding up the pieces as well. Chapter 18. Big plans. Nunuk had not been pleased with what they had found out. Even if they assured her, Tom was adamant his world could not come here by force. He had been transported by a weird entity, not of his world. Sapphire couldn't blame her though. Knowing there was a force out there that outnumbered this entire world by orders of magnitude, while on a peace footing, was deeply unsettling. In the end, she had settled on the fact that if this was true, there wasn't anything they could do about it. But she had a guy who knew the secrets of such an army, and she would be damned if she didn't make the most of it. Nunuk had Apuma draw up another circle to make the discussion easier. For the first time, however, Tom hadn't been willing to cooperate entirely. By written inefficient of the upset of Sabroili, many ethards, the British, was it sir to take other ones, Rater? I will not teach you the means to kill any who stand before you. I will teach you things that will help people and make their lives better, not destroy them. At least, not yet. Tom had said Nunuk had been going at him hard for a while now. It was clear she had the scent of just what some of the things Tom knew could theoretically do. Tom hadn't been ready for this conversation. He was still trying to work out what was a good idea to share at this point. Better weapons would make defending against the evils of this world so much easier and save countless lives. Nunuk had protested. Only if evil doesn't have them. If they do, then you are just killing faster, was Tom's reply. Her point was valid, he thought, but he didn't want to teach her how to wipe out her rivals. Besides, what if they are all racist here? He hadn't seen a non-white dragonette yet. If that even existed, he needed to know these people a lot better before imparting that sort of knowledge. Why would we give our enemies our new weapons that would be stupid? Nunuk clearly found the argument ridiculous. In time, they will get them. They always do. In my world, we always try to have better weapons than our enemy. The result? We now have weapons that can wipe out millions of lives in a blink of an eye and leave the ground poisoned for thousands of years. I will not go down in history as the one who set you down that path. I will not. There was silence in the grand hall, his little outburst clearly having caused quite a bit of thinking to be undertaken. The ramifications of what he was talking about clearly were not lost on those in the room. Why would you make something like that? Fengi had asked, seemingly horrified. Rightly so, he thought. She should be. Because nobody wants to die for nothing, and if destruction is certain, you will not go to war. We call it mutually assured destruction. No major country has been in open war with another since the invention of such weapons. Nobody dares. We call them nukes, sometimes also referred to as weapons of mass destruction. They are as far as we have gone down the road of weaponry and destruction, but the principle applies to all. Better weapons only result in more death and destruction. In the long run, never peace and prosperity. That is achieved through economics, cooperation, and technological progress. Tom felt like a preacher of the rapture, but he didn't see the alternative. He needed to convince these people he knew best what was smart to give them and what was not. What will you have us do then, if you start giving us all these other things you talk about? How will we defend them? Others will come to try and take it if they deem it worth the effort. Nunuk had a point, of course. Somebody would come looking in time. Nothing stays secret forever. Nor was this supposed to be a secret. He was supposed to change this world after all, not just this island. I haven't figured that out. That is why I didn't seek this conversation yet. I don't have an answer, but it is beside the point for now anyway. I wouldn't be able to make anything special with your current facilities. That will need to be the first priority no matter what. Right then, you speak of needing things. What might those be? Nunuk, seeming to accept this, was all she was getting for the time being. Large quantities of metal for the production of manufacturing machines. We are talking about a lot of metal. I don't know what metal is worth to you, but in guessing it ain't cheap, you would be correct in that assumption. It is quite valuable and we don't make it ourselves, only shape it. How much do you need? Tons, I think. At least a few hundred kilos to make some basic machines if creative with the use of other materials. There is no way we would be able to afford that, not to mention the cost of transporting it. I doubt we even have that much metal here total. Nunuk was clearly baffled by the request, as if she couldn't comprehend what he would need so much metal for. I believe I have a plan to that. Sugar seems to be very valuable to you, yes? What is sugar? Nunuk's tone shift was tangible. She was clearly not sure where this conversation was going, but was simply allowing him to get on with it. It's like honey powder, but even sweeter. Tom clarified. Your huntresses have had a taste already. The candy I gave to them was melted sugar with fruit flavor. So like honey of sorts. Yes, that is very valuable. About the price of silver per weight. Bees are very dangerous. Many who collect honey die in the process. The ones who are brave enough to do it are few and far between, and they demand considerable pay. That makes it incredibly hard to acquire. Why do you ask? Because I brought the means to grow sugar. Please elaborate. Nunuk was clearly very intent on this new development, as she leaned forward almost in anticipation, Tom thought. I brought seeds for a plant called sugar beets. They are easy to grow and contain a large amount of natural sugar. You boil them down and render the liquid till you get a hard crystal. You then crush that into powder, and voila, sugar. It won't be pure, but it will still be as sweet as any honey. You know how to grow honey? It came from the gentleman that had caused Sapphire to hide when they arrived. I would say impossible, but you seem to take that lightly. Well, where I come from, sugar is as cheap as bread, so yeah. This was when a puma fainted, either from exhaustion or the information dumped on the poor guy. Dakota had been there to catch him at least. There was a lot of commotion in the grand hall with people bickering and pointing. Nunuk had just sat back down in her chair contemplating what to do with this information. What to do with this information? Tom had just told her his people had the ability to kill on a scale she had never even dared have nightmares about. And he was so scared the same would happen here. He wasn't sure what to do. And now, they were apparently contemplating becoming sugar farmers? Also, the sweets Tom had given them were considered cheap where he was from. Well, it explained why he had given them out so freely back then. What was going to happen now? At least it sounded like Tom wouldn't be able to do much just yet. He needed many things to get started. Also, why did he want to start here? He could just go to the capital and find someone who could get him what he wanted. She didn't reckon that would be hard, given some of the things he had brought. Was it because he couldn't fly? He was technically stranded here for the time being. She decided to bring it up with Nunuk in private at some point. For now, the lessons had become a lot more important. These translation sessions could not continue indefinitely, so Tom needed to learn Draconic fast. It wouldn't hurt if he could teach them English as well, so they could read his books, even if there were things he still wanted to hide from them. Tom was clearly willing to share what he thought was safe, but Nunuk didn't appreciate being told what she could and couldn't have. It was a difficult position to argue, however, following what Tom had told them. Besides, it wasn't like they could easily force him even if they wanted to. They had continued asking questions of Tom after Apuma had been taken to go lie down for a bit. Apparently, Tom's plan was to plant these sugar beets in spring, so they would be ready in autumn, giving them nearly a year before any results. It seemed he believed it was currently autumn. That caused some confusion, but eventually they convinced him it was in fact mid-spring, so they should probably get going. So that is how pretty much the entire keep found themselves working to make a new field in record time. Too many protests from some of the participants naturally. Why don't we just put the weird magic fruits in the ground and be done with it? Jackalope had protested. Because we want them to grow as big as they can get. Raoulf clearly enjoying their misery. But Earth is Earth. This is just to get us all dirty. Jackalope clearly wasn't buying it. Oh, just you wait. You haven't seen dirty yet. The chuckle and wide smile on the guy made Sapphire realize she should go find something else to do before they got to whatever he was thinking about. Shortly thereafter, she heard some considerable moaning from Jackalope, followed by a high-pitched whine. She was already closely acquainted with how one fertilizes a field by falling over with a wheelbarrow. Fengi had begun laughing, only to receive a handful of manure to the face for her trouble. She proceeded to run around screaming until Esmeralda came over with some water to wash it off. Tom had cracked a laugh. The scene, with all hands helping working in shifts and Tom getting out the quad bike to set a new world record for plowing, they had a hastily prepared field ready by evening, ready to be sown tomorrow, even if the fencing still lacked. Sapphire had to admit it was impressive to watch Tom work. He just didn't seem to get tired as the others did. Even Raoulf, who was used to this type of work, had to give up trying to keep up. And that was while being told by Nunuk to slow down quite regularly. Sapphire was starting to understand why he needed more food than them at least. They had agreed on planting only half of the sugar beet seeds Tom had brought in case something went wrong. He had shown Raoulf the selection of seeds he had brought, and the farmer had been speechless. There were so many things he had no idea even existed. They had agreed they should try as many different things as they could in small patches to see what would grow here and what wouldn't. Tom had been consulting the book Sapphire had been looking in regularly. It was clearly so kind of manual of how to farm. It was quite clear after all, this was not one of Tom's areas of competence, even if he was good at digging drains and holes. E.B. Experius, notes once of great stand, the text stand down the line minus. Polygraphic, while this wasn't entirely how Tom had imagined the Enlightenment project was supposed to start. But it did the trick. Farming was the key to both money and fuel apparently, so might as well start there. Even if it was a shame sugar was worth this much, it would in turn make alcohol-based fuel incredibly expensive, not even considering the distilling process. But if he was sitting on the world's main supply of both and the world's only machine shop, price wouldn't be much of a problem. Though Nunuk's words were weighing heavily on his mind. As soon as they began trading in this stuff, people would notice. And with the kind of wealth that simply growing silver could generate, they were looking at some serious incentive for people to come knocking. They would need equally serious defenses. Those would be expensive, however, so they needed to buy time. Maybe that was a problem for the locals, Tom thought. This was a keep, after all. It was clearly meant to be defended against considerable forces. Why was that? What were they expecting to fight? Tom suddenly became acutely aware that he was sworn to defend the keep he was currently working to turn into a massive target. Shit, the Chapes the worse, and what they get more denomination. And the patches, one of the videos of wards, one of the Haken. 19. No pushover. It had taken a few days, but the sugar beet field and a wide assortment of other smaller patches had been prepped and sown. It was going to be interesting to see if plants from home would grow here, Tom thought. Most of the plant life seemed familiar and only slightly different. Strange, pretty flowers, the big-ass trees in the forest. And he could swear the grass was greener here too, but for the time being, they could only wait. This was one of the reasons Tom had never really been one to deal with plants before. They just took too long. That was where Raoul came in, though. He was apparently the head of farming around here. With the dragonettes being mostly carnivorous, much of their farming was done to provide animal feed rather than people food. They did eat some greens, though. Judging by the children, that was something they weren't pleased about, but it was apparently necessary to stay healthy. The adults didn't seem too bothered, so maybe it was a learned trait. Tom had instructed Ralph to the best of his ability, with the help of the book on survival farming, on how to care for the different plants. Ralph hadn't seemed surprised by anything, so Tom believed it was probably fairly routine stuff. Plants were plants, after all. There were only so many ways to tend them. With the farming project well underway, Tom had returned to his studies. His time was now split evenly between them, teaching him and Tom, trying his best to explain as much as possible to them. Nunuk had even visited a few times to see their progress. The lessons with the children were the exception, of course. Little Kiran wasn't ready to know about those sorts of things yet. He and Tom had become quite good friends, however. They were on roughly the same wavelength when it came to speaking, and because little Kiran showed no fear of anything, Tom didn't scare him in the slightest. While the other children weren't exactly afraid of Tom, they still maintained a sense of healthy wariness. Tom had given the little bugger one of his sweets, just to see how he would react. The results had been explosive. Tom had failed to account for the fact that Kiran probably weighed about 8 kilograms tops, and here in the low gravity, it felt more like 4 or 5 kilograms. The little dude had hit the ground running and kept going for nearly 30 minutes. Good news, though. He apparently set a new record for the youngest dragonette in the keep to learn to fly without assistance when he sprinted off the tall set of stairs leading down into the grand hall from the sleeping areas. Esmeralda had some fairly stern questions afterward and didn't seem to buy that Tom had managed to teach the little one. Apparently, flight training was supposed to happen when you turned 5. Whoops. He had held up a candy and pointed at Kiran. It seemed to click for her after that. She just face-palmed and went to fetch Nunuk, most likely to have her give the little one a once-over. She left along with the other huntresses to go on a hunt not long after the little incident. According to Sapphire, Dakota had tried to convince Nunuk to let her bring either Tom or one of his guns on the hunt. Tom wasn't entirely sure. It had been quite a charade of gestures, words, and even some grunts and handshaking. They realized he wouldn't just give up his weapons, right? It seemed Dakota had been unsuccessful, though, so no matter. They'd only been away for the day and returned with 2 deer. They were fiercely efficient hunters, Tom thought. Sure, a human hunter could probably manage the same with modern equipment, but they used a bow and arrow, and not a compound bow either. Note to self: look into making a compound bow, he wrote down in his little notebook. Being able to cover vast distances and pounce with impunity from above clearly had its advantages. The fact that nothing ground-born could outrun them was probably helpful too. But hey, fresh deer tonight then. Sweet, Tom mused to himself. Though the evaluing post-it and the powers of Strongkis evaluation and the pictory and tants, the avile A's of Strongkis their accompany age, the even Dakota and the others had returned from the successful hunt around the common meal. Dakota had spoken up. Even if we don't have trouble hunting for our food, I would like to see how Tom hunts. We know he hunted a deer for himself before we found him. I would like to know how. Judging by how he is dressed, I think he sneaks up on the target, Sapphire had added. Such underhanded tactics? Kokashi had questioned. I don't think he cares that much about honor. Just look at how he's dressed. Ratchuk clearly wasn't impressed with Tom thus far. It made sense he was a man of honor and duty above all. From what Sapphire had gathered, Tom was friendly, but he hadn't really had the chance yet. He hasn't really gotten the chance to show his true colors yet. He's been doing farm work and school for Pete's sake. How could he? Sapphire had interjected, well, maybe he should get a chance then. Ratchuk was clearly playing at something Sapphire thought. What have you got in mind? You can't exactly have a sword fight with him yet. He's not fully recovered. Nanuke seemingly having caught wind of the conversation and decided to join in. Oh, come now. We all saw how he worked in the fields. Besides, what makes you think his kind doesn't heal faster? It sure seems like it. Why do you want to test him anyway? Judging by Dakota and her huntresses, his weapons would make him more than a capable warrior. A warrior without honor can't be trusted. Besides, I haven't seen any of these weapons in action, and by the sound of it, all you have seen was him hitting a tree. Not very impressive in my opinion. I won't deny you have a point, but what do you want? A demonstration? Nunuk had asked, don't you? Besides, I want to see him in honorable combat. See what our guest is made of. You made him take the oath of the guard, which technically puts him under my command. I want to know what my warriors can and can't do. Yeah, I guess I do, but I will not have you beating 7 bells out of him. Me? Fight? It had come from Tom, seeming very confused, having clearly tried and failed to follow the conversation. Yes, play, fight. Nunuk had tried. Bang bang? Tom had gone pointing his finger into the distance, probably trying to mimic his weapons. Yes, Tom, bang bang, and Ratchuk added as he walked over, drawing his sword, handing Tom the blade. Tom immediately went to work examining the piece, testing the edge, and admiring the craftsmanship. Very pretty. Don't no use, Tom said, looking apologetically. You don't know how to use a sword? At all. Ratchuk was seemingly taken aback by this. Sapphire had considered that quite likely Tom hadn't carried a blade beside his small knife, so why would he know how to use a sword? Human, no use no more, old weapon. Not again, Sapphire thought. Fingers crossed Ratchuk would take it in as good a spirit as Shiva had. Why stop? Ratchuk had questioned, seemingly not grasping why anyone would drop using swords. Not effective. I kill before you see me, Tom had answered. You fight like a coward and can't even defend yourself when it gets tough? Ratchuk was starting to sound quite accusatory, and Tom clearly didn't seem too happy with the situation, looking to Sapphire for help. Think about it, Ratchuk. If you have weapons that can destroy cities, why use swords? Sapphire did her best to sound reasonable, even if she deep down found the statement wrong. To defend your honor, of course, and to defend yourself in battle, you can't always just run away and shoot from afar. Besides, Tom here can't even fly, so how would he get away? Fight close too. Tom had gone, surprising Ratchuk. How you have no sword, not the knife? Surely number. Use gun time, buy knees down of a new stall, had pushing muscles as the sentiment. That use gun I stayed, that you standing on what was clearly a small archery range with a little sparring ring. With nearly the entire keep watching him, he had managed to convince Shiva to bring 2 old broken chest plates. He had also gotten a few half-rotten cabbage-like things from Raouf that seemingly hadn't kept well over the winter. Along with some pieces of loose wood, they would make up the day's targets. He had recruited Jackalope and Fengi to help him set up some targets, but for now, everything was still here in the training field. Ratchuk had seemed extremely skeptical of the arrangements, but hadn't protested yet. Ready. What show? Tom had started off. Defense against me, Ratchuk had gone, drawing his sword. That was not the response Tom had been hoping for. How would he do that without killing the man? He knew the sword was a blunt one, but still metal. No, not kill, not. He really wasn't good enough at this, yet not allowed. Tom began backpedaling and dodging the incoming swings. It was clear Ratchuk was going easy on him at least. Stop running and fight. Are you a coward? Right then, there was nothing for it. The sword was blunt, so this would only hurt. Tom reversed from his little backpedal and stepped forward. He caught the incoming swing on his right shoulder, then wrapped his arm around the blade, locking it in place. The pain was substantial, but it worked. Ratchuk had clearly not expected him to go on the offensive. Tom pushed forward, placing his lead foot behind Ratchuk's left leg in hopes of tripping him. Ratchuk had clearly been overconfident, but he was skilled too, and the whole double-jointed leg made it easy for him to avoid the trip. Tom was trained to an extent in hand-to-hand combat, but this dude had most likely been training for most of his life, and he still had a hand free. So he just punched Tom in the face and opened his mouth to snarl at Tom. Tom quickly became aware of just how many teeth were in range of his face and elected to do something about it. So he used his offhand to draw his revolver and stuffed it in Ratchuk's mouth. "Yo, you dead!" he shouted. Then he pulled the revolver back out and fired into the sky as if to illustrate his point. There was silence on the field until Tom let Ratchuk's arm go again, moving his shoulder to try and get rid of the pain. He could do with some actual armor if that was going to become a common occurrence. "Now, show how dead." Tom turned from the captain and took aim at some of the pieces of wood. He fired 3 shots in quick succession at 3 targets. They were large targets, so not too hard to hit. Then he took a shot at the breastplate with the cabbage thing inside, and stuff went everywhere. Ratchuk flinched noticeably at that one. Tom then holstered his revolver and went over to collect the breastplate and presented it to Ratchuk, who just stood there staring. The others came over to have a look as well. The sea. Sapphire was shocked he could shoot that quickly. No bowman alive could have matched that rate of fire, and when he took a shot at the cabbage, pieces went everywhere. He then brought the breastplate back to show the small hole going in. The weapon had punched straight through the metal. Then he whistled at Jackalope and Fengi. They came running over. He handed them the 2 remaining cabbages and the breastplate. He had clearly told them where to put the items beforehand as they took to the sky and flew down range. Fengi had gone out to what Sapphire would consider maximum bow range and placed the first cabbage, but Jackalope had continued out to over double that distance. Arborations and bite the text, widened pages of first as of soon, and he had no 2 A's. Dam wasn't quite sure about this. His rifle had yet to be re-zeroed for this strange gravity, and he had no clue how lower gravity would affect long-range ballistic, nor did he know exactly what gravity was here, but he had made a guess and adjusted as best he could. Besides, he could zero on the first target until he got it sort of right. He picked up his rifle and kneeled, chambering around. Its sun and 8s of cabaretly inside, this time with the dunker parts of sire. D-buys and ties of spetches and sauce. Savia wondered how he could even point the weird, one-handed weapon accurately enough to hit something that far away. That was when Tom picked up the long, strange metal stick she had seen him walking with. Wait, was the big stick a weapon too? But the little one had blown straight through a breastplate. "Oh, far-away targets," she said, earning a look or two from those around her. With a thunderous crack, Tom fired at the first target. The cabbage instantly exploded, pieces flying everywhere. It looked as though it had been dropped from one of the towers. This weapon was clearly even more powerful. Tom made a motion that caused a metallic sound, and a brass cylinder ejected from the weapon. It was quite a lot longer than the one he had shown them before. He fiddled with the weapon for a moment and took another shot. The clang against the breastplate was heard once more. Then Tom did some more fiddling, made the motion again, and shot at the far target, apparently missing. Well, that was comforting. At least he could miss. Tom made the motion again, fiddled some more, and took a second shot, this time scoring a hit as more cabbage went flying. He picked up the brass cylinders and got up. "That how I fight, you very dead," Tom said, sounding very unimpressed as he walked back past Ratchuk. "The dross of the cells of Ashan Island Storm is the tire highland of the Shom. Explosive mines was the lethal test have been a success." The little test had been a success, at least out to 250 meters-ish. Just going half on the adjustments seemed to work close enough for elevation adjustment at least. He would need to do some testing out beyond that. It would be more than worth the ammunition. He would need to set up some more accurately ranged targets for that thought. Little Kieran had apparently managed to wrangle his way free and came running over. Big boom! What that Tom had picked the little one up, putting down his rifle. Rickle Kieran, trying his best and sounding even more adorable for the attempt. "Yes, Kieran Rickle. You beat Ratchuk, he dead." Kieran was sitting wide-eyed, staring up at Tom as if he was meeting Batman or something. "Yeah, but no fair, he no gun. You win." It would seem Tom had just been elevated from a comfortable nest and friend with sweets to a personal hero. He didn't quite know how to handle that. While be everyone has a vide of the risk in the extractive routes, this is the spade as strong. Sapphire did feel a little sorry for him, as he stared out at the ruined targets, probably contemplating what would have happened if he had been on the wrong end of that, and just how close he had gotten. "What is that, Tom?" Sapphire had gone, hobbling over, pointing at the long metal stick. "Rifle, this revolver." Tom held up the smaller, one-handed weapon Sapphire was familiar with, but the long one was clearly even more powerful and had an incredible range. He hadn't struggled to hit a target beyond what she considered possible with a bow, and she was, without a doubt, the finest shot here. Well, she had been the best. Tom seemed destined to take that title now. Tom, how far hit Dakota had gone? Double that. With effort, maybe more. So yeah, Sapphire thought to herself, Tom was now the best shot in the keep. Damn it. She had worked so hard for that. She even learned magic to help guide the shots. She was starting to understand Ratchik a bit. He must feel fairly shit knowing he was just bested in hand-to-hand combat by someone who had never even held a sword. And now she was outshot by someone who had never held a bow. Chest. Zist. Alas, the sweary has had paw just as also, alas, as the frest of the he. And the very essay of his aunties are rear, the proster highs, if nothing else. Tom's little demonstration had earned him a wary respect from everyone, especially Ratchik, who almost seemed a little timid after his near-death experience. Nevertheless, it had clearly also convinced Nunuk that Tom needed to start his time with the guard. Even with his reduced sleep schedule, Tom's day was starting to get quite full. However, doing something that wasn't intellectual in any way would be a nice change of pace. Now, he was making his way to the armory where he was supposed to meet Ratchik. He had all his combat gear with him and Kiran riding along, of course, as Tom had promised to bring him. "We go fight. No Kiran, no fight." Learn Kiran was clearly excited. Tom wasn't sure if the guard would let the little one stay, but if not, there would surely be trouble, he thought. Kiran might be 3, but damn, he had spirit. As Tom opened the door, he found 5 dragonettes waiting for him, including Ratchik, Anka, Balathon, and Kokashi. The last one introduced themselves as Heron. Tom knew there were 2 more, but they were likely sleeping following their turn on the night shift. "Hi, nice to meet you." Tom had been practicing his greetings, even if he had met most of them before. It was the best one he had. "Welcome." Tom Ratchik straightened, looking more like a proper soldier. He walked over, giving Tom his hand, and pointed to a table in the middle of the room. "Equipment." Sweet, Tom thought. So far, everything he had seen the dragonettes use had been high-quality handmade. As he made his way over to the table, it was clear, though this was more like training equipment, there was a one-handed sword. It was of the same general design as the others he had seen. It had a straight double-edged blade that tapered at the tip, clearly meant for thrusting into an opponent. The blade was dented and a bit discolored, clearly having been extensively used and repaired many times before. There was a belt scabbard for it, along with a hodgepodge of random armor pieces. "We not know what fit," Ratchik had explained as Tom was examining the various pieces. He had begun testing out a few things. The gauntlets looked like they might fit, along with the shoulder pads. Tom had no clue of the proper terminology. The breastplate too, but he was wondering if it would be smart to replace his existing armor. "Have this," he went, taking off his vest, pulling out the ballistic plate in the carrier. "Stop rifle." The dragonettes had gathered around inspecting the piece. Small Kokashi went, picking up the plate and placing it in front of his chest. But strong Tom tried to assure no stop bullet. He went knocking in the breastplate. "But stop sword or arrow," Ratchuk had retorted. True, uncertain, Tom had gone holding up the 2 pieces of armor. "Hold things. Help hide," he concluded, taking the vest. "Need, camouflage, other." Tom didn't know what the draconic was for that one. "Make better hide," he went, trying to explain, pointing at the shiny pieces of metal, then to his green and black pattern uniform. "You want to smudge pure and beautiful steel?" Balathon clearly didn't like Tom's suggestion. They must really like pure things. Come to think of it, they wore white when they could. Their armor was shiny. Oh, like shiny. Tom was feeling quite proud of figuring that one out until he looked down at himself. "Ah," was all he'd said. Sorry home if soldier shiny die quick, why would clean armor kill a soldier? Ratchuk was clearly puzzled by this easy to see, easy to shoot. Ratchuk seemed to understand, rubbing his chin for a while. Not with Beal to decide our hell, to make sex and which my stairs of sires. My true, with the highs as Sapphire sat in the kitchen helping with that evening's dishes, along with Balathon, the guard had suddenly burst out at her. He wants to deface our armor, Saf, cover it with paint. Well, he does seem to take the whole color scheme very seriously. Even his sleeping bag has that strange pattern. You don't understand, he brought paints. For himself too, he smeared his face in black and green war paint. He looked like something you should kill on sight. If he is your enemy, I think you are correct in that statement. You saw his little demonstration. Yeah, he claimed on his world you hide when in battle. Otherwise you die. He does not fight with honor, even from a distance. It seems no one from his home does. Would you, with weapons like that? No, I guess not, but he isn't home. We need to convince him to fight like a proper warrior. Otherwise, what happens if some Vargulfs attack Sapphire interrupted? They won't care. Besides, Nunuk would never allow him to go off to fight a war or something. She needs him here. But still, he showed us how his people fight. They dig holes in the ground and mounds of dirt to hide behind. We can't have him do that, even against beasts of the night. If anyone finds out, we will be branded as cowards. I think any observer would be more interested in how the beast just fell over dead in front of them, to be honest. Sapphire tried her best to be reassuring, but the guard had a point. Perhaps they should find out if Tom could fight with honor. I hope you are right, Balathon concluded, getting back to his washing up, but clearly not convinced. Some of the signs I can obstaware affix the offspring signs of sign is the best to calm, to the cavitate, to opening, calm. That everything he knew about warfare was abhorrent to these people. They seemed more show fighters than soldiers in his eyes by now. They didn't want to get their armor dirty. They didn't want to hide from an enemy. And they seemed very fond of duels and formation fighting. Well, at least if the same was true of the enemy, Tom wouldn't have much of a problem dealing with them. But his concerns about what would happen if the bad guys, whoever they might be, got their hands on firearms had only grown. They honestly seemed like the kind of people who would consider ranks of muskets a good idea. Jesus Christ, Tom thought to himself. They had also begun training him in sword fighting, with and without a shield. At least they were competent in that regard. The fact Tom had no clue what he was doing probably helped, though. He was being tossed around like a play doll in the ring. Ratchuk in particular had been ruthless. Tom thought that was fair, following what he had done to the guy. Still, the swords hurt like hell even if they were blunted. Tom had managed to fit some of the odd armor pieces mostly to his arms, which were seemingly similar, if a little broader than the dragonette's. It helped a lot with the pain, as he was hammered again and again by his far superior opponent. He had begun to figure out the basics, though. The painful crash course was a good teacher. He brought up his blade again, settling back into the stance Kokashi had shown him in between bouts. Kokashi had taken it upon himself to teach. The guy seemed friendly. Tom had answered in a whistle a few times, prompting a smile from the guard. Tom wasn't gonna let the guy forget he thought he was a songbird anytime soon. That had simply been too hilarious. Tom and Ratchuk began circling each other, eyeing each other. Ratchuk seemed to be breathing heavy. Tom was getting a little winded, but not too bad. Tom elected to try and tire his opponent rather than beat him outright. He began circling faster, switching direction, moving forward to the point Ratchuk took a swing, only to retreat, tempting Ratchuk to follow him. It wasn't elegant, but as he yielded the initiative, Ratchuk eagerly took it, clearly trying to prove just how much better he was. Tom was constantly on the defense by now, constantly retreating, trying his best to maintain the range. Ratchuk was clearly enjoying his show of superiority. He could herd Tom around as he pleased. Tom got ample use out of his shield, even if Ratchuk still got a swipe through every now and again. If this had been a real fight, he was likely dead. That didn't matter though. This was a training duel, and more to the point, this was now a battle of attrition. Ratchuk had taken his bait. The constant defense and sword swinging had taken its toll. The guard began to slow, and just as Tom thought he was about to call for a break, he went on the offensive. Tom couldn't match the guard in speed or skill, but Ratchuk was obviously tiring and beginning to slow. Ratchuk still managed to parry every thrust Tom made. But gone were the swift counters which had caused Tom so much pain at the start. Tom kept up the constant barrage, still being careful not to leave his own defense off too badly. Even badly exhausted, Ratchik still managed to get pretty close to landing. A hit a few times. But so did Tom. With every parry, the dragonette was getting more tired, heaving for breath by now. Tom was sweating hard and panting. But without the ability to sweat, Ratchik must surely be overheating badly. Tom got his answer as the dragonette finally started losing his composure and dropped to his knees, leaning his hand, gasping for air. Tom walked up and placed his blade on Ratchik's shoulder with a little tap. "You, dead there," was silence from the guards before Kiran burst out, "Yay, Tom," and made a small, celebratory growl. It took a while and some water before Ratchik returned to his senses, clearly having been pushed far beyond what seemed like a good idea to Tom's mind at least. He felt a little bad about that, but it wasn't like he could have won fairly, and the guy hadn't called for a break. "How did you do that?" Ratchik had demanded. "Endurance." Tom had tried shrugging, his limited vocabulary biting him for this one. "See wet." Tom held up his arm to show it was covered in sweat. "Cool, you didn't pour water on yourself. How are you wet?" "Sweat," Tom tried in English. He had no clue what the draconic would be for that. "Make water." "You make water to cool you down." Whatever. Ratchik was clearly accepting his defeat at the hand of the distinctly inferior swordsman. "You, still better," Tom had tried. The dude didn't deserve to be this down about it. He had killed Tom at least a dozen times, if not more. Tom had only managed the one after all. No, Dead Kiran had joined in from the table where he had taken up residence. "I got him one." "He got me many. He better." Tom had protested, the little dragonette seemingly not agreeing, curling back up. "He dead. We need to train you." Ratchik had gone. "Anchor, your turn." Well, shit, thought Tom. Sure, he could beat one of them in endurance, but he was outnumbered 5-1, and it looked like his own tactic was about to be used against him. 1002. Delicious, money of Acertes habeas was become and difference of a hisimi. The praises he created, the leaven created simpler. You should have seen it, he just kept going. He drove Ratchik to the point he just fell over from exhaustion. Then Anka went at him, and he just tried the same stunt again. "I'm betting that went well." "Yeah." Anka just ran him into the ground and hammered him till he could hardly move. "Yeah, he is good, old Ank. Doesn't like playing by others' rules," Sapphire said, giggling. But still the guy kept going. It was almost like the pain just spurred him on. He just kept coming. Eventually he even started to tire out Anka. Tom even managed to wrestle him to the ground one time, putting him in an arm lock on the ground. He might look weird, but he is strong. That is almost unsettling to think about. Well, I guess you got your answer to whether he can fight with honor then. Yeah, in the end, Ratchik had to call off the fight before they killed each other. I don't know if I would call it honorable. Tom fights to win anyway, he can. It was an awesome spectacle though. You do know it's not very nice telling me how awesome something was that I couldn't come down to see. Y-N-P-G. Oh, right. Sorry. Get Tom to carry you down. He takes the stairs anyway. Sometimes I honestly don't know if you are joking or not. Why is that? Afraid you are too heavy? That last one was both deliberate and uncalled for, Sapphire thought, as Kukashi stormed out the kitchen with flying cutlery trailing close behind. "Come back here, asshole. I'm not finished with you." Oh, he was going to pay for that, she thought, looking back at the still unfinished dishes he had left her with. This tract is not to sections between 10